Finally. What's up, y'all? We have a good stream set up today. Today I'm debating an atheist called Howdy in a formal debate. It starts here in 2 minutes-ish. So the rundown, real quickly, I wanted to run down, y'all, what the plan is. So it's a formal debate. It's going to be on my argument. So he will actually have to address the premises. From what I've seen with his intro, it seems like he's going to disagree with the principle of sufficient reasoning, the principle of proportionate causality, and it also has some problems with like classical metaphysics, so Aristotelian metaphysics, those types of things. It should be a pretty good stream. And yeah, thank you all for tuning in. I'd appreciate if y'all liked the live, help me get this started, and yeah. Let's get into this right now. Oh my god, I'm gonna unmute them. Alright. I'm all ready. When y'all are.
I think I'm ready.
Okay. Perfect.
All right, everything should be set up. I think it's gonna move you over. Oh crap, hang on, that was the wrong one. Okay, it should be set up to redirect, so that should be good to go. It's going to send you all over to the mega bloodbath.
Perfect.
So let me get that done right now.
Sure, everything's all set up. We're all good. Quadruple checking everything. All right, it's time, boys. Let's get this going. Get this party started. Okay. Howdy, did you want to intro first? Do you want me to intro first?
You definitely should go first.
That's what I was thinking. I was just trying to be polite.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, I know, like, I'm not supposed to, like, so if I got to choose, I think maybe you could present the argument, and then I guess if we have like 8 minutes, maybe you could try to spend a minute maybe on each of the premises and sort of talk a little bit about each one of them and sort of explain it a little bit better so that everyone can sort of follow along, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll have time for that. I was just going to give a general overview of what the argument argues for, and how it kind of works. Yeah. We ready to go?
But definitely try to give like the premises so the audience knows what the argument is, and then maybe Taco or you can put it on screen so people.
Do you want me just to go
Otherwise
premise by premise for my intro and explain it?
If you want to put it up on the screen, what you can do is you can share that. Now, tonight, we're going to have a good, clean debate. Let's avoid the low blows. This is going to be over the topic, does Bugs' cosmological argument prove God? Bugs is taking the affirmative. Howdy's taking the negative. Bugs is going to be starting out in the introduction and the closing statements. Then Howdy he's taking the negative, so he'll be second in both the introduction and the closing statements. There's going to be 8 minutes in both sections, and then hour-long open discussion. Every dollar in super chats adds another minute to the discussion, up to an additional hour, so you could go for up to 2 hours. We usually do open panel after, so make sure everybody sticks around for the open panel after. BugLovesAll should be linked in the description. If he's not, I'll fix it if it broke the link. But he's you're Orthodox, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's an Orthodox Christian debater, and so he's linked in the bio or the description. And then Howdy, he doesn't have a platform to my understanding, but thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
What you should do, Taco, is give like him maybe like a couple minutes to introduce himself and maybe.
Do you want to talk about your platform, Bugs?
Yeah, my name's BugLovesAll. I'm an apologist. Oh, by the way, can y'all see my screen? We're all good on that end?
Can you put them up, Taco?
Just do an introduction, and we'll put that up when we get to the opening.
Yeah. I'm an apologist. I'm Eastern Orthodox. I've been doing apologetics for a few years now, and
is that everything you want to say?
I mean, you should at least like tell them like your channel name or anything. You don't want to.
Your link, where to find you, what you talk about.
My channel is BugLovesAll. I debate Protestants, atheists, Muslims, Mormons, the whole 9 yards. Much more.
Gotcha. Okay. Any conversions happen on your channel live yet?
If there's a conversion, I've had a lot off. I don't think I've had any on stream. It's more of like they come back afterwards,
Okay.
and I don't need to
Cool.
film that. Get what I'm saying?
So, $5 super chats gets you a question to the debaters. We'll interrupt the debate. $2 gets posted on screen. If it's a really mean super chat, I will read it for the most part, unless it's just absolutely crazy or TOS or something like that, in which case I do have the right to not put it on screen or read it. But the mean ones that I'll read are going to be at the tail end. Everything else, questions and comments, I'll read in the middle of the debate and interrupt them for that. With that being said, y'all are going to have 8 minutes for the openings here. Let's get this timer started. Bug, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
And I will start your 8 minutes. All right, you got 8 minutes starting now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in and watching the debates today. Obviously, we're going to be debating against my argument. Now, to sum up my argument is all really contingent against the laws of logic and PSR, which is the principle of sufficient reason. Essentially, the principle of sufficient reasoning states that everything that exists, every contingent thing that exists, must have a sufficient reason as to why it is and why it is as it is rather than otherwise. Now, this is pretty much the root of my argument, and I frame my argument so that if you do affirm the PSR, then ultimately it would lead into the requirement of a necessary being. And the attributes that this necessary being would be required to have would be things such as being pure act, i.e. fully actual, that would be having the omni attributes and so on, as well as possessing consciousness in accordance to the principle of proportionate causality. Now, the argument goes as follows, as you guys can see with the syllogism. Premise 1, PSR teaches that every contingent being has sufficient reason why it is and why it is as it is rather than otherwise, which I've already stated. Premise 2 is contingent realities exist. Now, when I'm talking about contingency, something contingent, something whose existence is not necessarily / could have failed to exist or could be otherwise. It depends on something outside of itself for its being. For example, us humans, we would be an example of contingency. Certain attributes contingent beings have would be changing, potential, and so on. Premise 3 is the totality of contingent reality is itself contingent. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm just basically saying that contingent reality, like in its whole, if we just take the entirety of contingent reality, it's contingent. Premise 4 is no contingent thing, including any member of that totality, can be the sufficient reason of that totality. Now, as I stated with premise 1, with a contingent being needing a sufficient reasoning, if they are contingent, they aren't their own sufficient reason. So a contingent thing within this totality couldn't be its sufficient reason because it itself would need a sufficient reason. Premise 5, this leads on to premise 5, an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons would itself be contingent and thus unexplained, violating PSR. Now, this is to address the infinite regress, which is what some people hold to, which is the idea that there's every contingent being, there's a sufficient reason for that, and that also has a sufficient reason, and so on and so forth to infinity. Now, if we take an infinite regress, this is a violation of PSR because it doesn't actually justify anything. Instead, it just pushes the problem one step backwards over and over again, and that chain in its totality is still contingent. It's insufficient in itself. Because of that, an infinite regress, it would violate PSR and would be incompatible if you do affirm PSR. This is where we get into conclusion 1. Therefore, there must exist a necessary being outside the totality that is sufficient reason for the contingent totality. Now, something necessary is something that cannot not exist. It exists by its own nature and has no external cause or dependency. So its sufficient reason is grounded within itself. Premise 6, anything with potency is not necessary through itself and will require sufficient reason. Now, the reason that is with potential. Potential is a dependency, i.e. something that could exist otherwise. That's what a potential entails, right? So if you were to say that there's a necessary being, but it's not pure act, i.e., it has potential, it would need a sufficient reason as to why it has that potential. And as I said before, there can't be an infinite regress. So ultimately, there would need to be an ending sufficient reason. That's a necessary being that has no potential. Because of this, we get into conclusion 2, therefore the necessary being must be pure act. Now, premise 7, since the necessary being is the sufficient reason for all contingent reality, it is therefore the ultimate cause and sustainer of all that exists. I'm just restating essentially what has been established here. And conclusion 3, therefore the necessary being is the ultimate cause and creator of every contingent thing that exists. Premise 8, humans are conscious beings possessing intellect and will. This is the part of the argument in which I now argue that the necessary being would have to be conscious. Premise 9, according to the principle of proportionate causality, the effect must pre-exist in its cause either formally, virtually, or eminently. Now, this is just, that premise right there states what the principle of proportionate causality is. If for here, something formally, it just means you possess its exact matter. So let's say if the effect has X and the cause formally produced that effect, X, then the cause actually just has X, possesses it. Virtually is to have the power or capacity to produce it either from using an external source, like a potter using clay, or by possessing it in potentia. So for example, a potter has can virtually create the effect of a pot by using the external source from it, that being the clay. And then eminently is to possess in a higher, superior way. Something that's ontologically superior is just something that gives the most capability while having less or zero dependencies or contingencies. Ultimately, the most ontologically superior thing is something's automatically ontologically superior or eminent if it possesses no dependencies or contingencies. Premise 10, since consciousness exists in human beings and the first mover is the ultimate cause of all being, it must possess consciousness eminently, formally, or virtually. This is just to go upon this, and in accordance to PSR, if you were to posit that humans were conscious and this did not come from the necessary being, then A, you'd be violating some premises over here, but B, you'd be violating PSR because this would be a brute fact. The sufficient reason for consciousness and where it came from would be coming from nothing. Therefore, the first cause possesses consciousness formally, virtually, or eminently. Now, premise 11, but virtual possession implies potentiality. It's either because, as I stated here, what we understand virtual to mean, it's either in the sense of potential or using an external source. If you take it with the external source route, then that external source would need to be have a sufficient reason for existence and ultimately need a necessary being. So this is completely ruled out of the scenario. So the only other sense you could say virtually is via potentia, which once again doesn't work because the necessary being can't have potentia. Therefore, the first mover cannot possess consciousness virtually.
Just under a minute.
Premise 12, only a being that is itself conscious can possess consciousness in this way. Therefore, the first mover must be conscious. Now, the reason I hold to a formal position of consciousness is even then I can grant an consciousness eminently, but to possess consciousness in a higher, more superior way doesn't make much sense because consciousness means to possess awareness, intellect, and will. Awareness is to know what something is. Intellect is the power ability to know universals, essences, immaterial truths, and will is the ability to power to choose between two things. There isn't an eminent form of these things because they're just abilities. They're just capped out. So that's why it results with the conclusion. Therefore, the first mover must be conscious, and this fully actualized conscious first mover is what we call God. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the introduction there. Oh, hang on. All right. And then I got to get Howdy back up here. Howdy, let me know when you're ready. You ready?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Start on my next word.
Okay. Guy Cooks.
Okay, I want to thank Taco for setting up and hosting the debate. I want to thank Bug for his participation and presentation of the argument. And I want to thank the audience for their continued support. Point of order, the opinions presented here are my own and not meant to represent Taco or any of the panelists, this channel, or its community. So first is like there's many variations of the PSR as to like which facts require sufficient explanation, what constitutes a sufficient or what requires sufficient reason and what constitutes sufficient reason and which modal scope or register the PSR is utilizing. Now the version
Mhm.
Bug seems to be alluding to is that for each contingent fact P, there obtains another fact Q such that Q explains P. That is to say, P and Q stand in explanatory relation, where P is an explanandum and Q is explanans. However, this principle seems to be inadequately justified and suffers from plausible counterexamples. The PSR seemingly must at least accommodate indeterminacy or stochastic processes. The main argument I've seen in support of these
Okay, that was a
versions,
lot. I can't
contingency
keep track.
versions of the PSR, is to exclude certain skeptical scenarios elicited from brute facts, of which this kind of PSR is going to exclude. So it's like, well, if there's brute facts, you can't know anything, sort of stuff. Um, However, there's not really any version of the PSR that can establish the impossibility of skeptical scenarios. Furthermore, the skepticism of which the PSR would exclude could easily be diffused from a defeasible presumption in favor of an explanation of contingent facts, such that the burden of proof would be on the skeptic to provide defeaters to that presumption. So we sort of have to talk about like what contingency is. So for me, I would analyze it. P is contingent if and only if possibly P and possibly not P, or equivalently not necessarily P or necessarily not P. And so used in the traditional classical possible world semantics, it would mean that P obtains in some possible worlds and does not obtain in some other possible worlds. Now, if this is like logical modality, then necessarily P would mean like not P entails some sort of contradiction, and that possibly P or possibly not P would not entail contradiction. So I'm unclear about what the modal scope of the argument is, and it's also unclear what metaphysics of modality is being deployed, whether it's like concrete possible worlds or just abstract or um, representational, conceptual. I'd also remark that like the totality of all contingent facts, like the BCCF, or like you group them all up, sort of thing. Like I don't know if this is what he's alluding to with contingent reality exists, but if itself is considered to be a contingent fact, that would imply immediately that the totality would either be a member, an element, or a mereological component of itself. And those sorts of compositions are notoriously problematic. And in fact, there are mathematical axioms employed to prevent these sorts of constructions. You can think of regularity and foundation. Um, we should also be careful not to commit the fallacy of composition. For example, from the fact that every individual human has a mom, it would not follow that humanity itself has a mother. The argument also has to make use of like a lot of infinity hater moves to rule out alternatives, and so that's going to cut against the plausibility of the argument. Um, one thing one thought is like it would seem reasonable to explain every conjunct of the totality from citing other conjuncts. So, for example, how do you get the coffee cup from the plastic from the oil the oil on the ground from biological matter that died, and then you just keep giving explanations in terms of other contingent things all the way back to infinity, plausibly some sort of inflationary cosmos. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that explanation. Nothing's left out or needs to be explained such that the principle has straightforward, plausible counterexamples. Another is one assumption of the argument seems to be in Aristotelian metaphysics, which is questionable, that faces problems of circularity, implausibility, and inadequate justification. And even if there were initial contingent facts that did require an explanation, it seems plausible to cite non causal explanations that don't cite the activities of a being. We could consider explanations in terms of grounding or functional realization or structural constraints, metaphysical principles, etc. For example, we could consider a world in which there is a law that says, let there be an atom, or a law that says, let there be a 50-50 probability of there being an atom. This law could have been false, such that the atom's contingent, but there would be a contingent being without a necessary being, because a law is not a being, but rather just the nomology of the world. I would object also to the principle of proportionate causality because of the plausibility of emergence. So many composite objects are observed to have properties that their parts do not. So, like intelligent beings are sometimes composed of non-intelligent matter. Wetness and other macroscopic properties are not predicated of subatomic particles, and so the PPC sort of relies on the denial of emergence, which is very contested. And another move a
Yeah, this
non-theist
isn't
could
gonna
make
work.
is to say, well, you could grant that something exists necessarily that causes something contingent, such as the singularity or some other event having a probability of unity. That is to say, like 100% this event has to happen, sort of thing. Like those would be like necessary under most accounts of modal logic or modal metaphysics. Every contemporary proponent of cosmological arguments recognized that additional arguments are required to show that the entity whose existence is established possesses the familiar divine attributes. And my appraisal of cosmological arguments is that they're parasitic on ontological arguments, such that if the cosmological argument is sound or strong evidence, then the ontological argument is sound. Premise 2 would be that the ontological argument is unsound, such that the cosmological argument is unsound from modus tollens 1 2. Finally, the structure of the argument presented seems to be invalid, although being charitably, we may suppose to be able to reconstruct the argument in a valid form. So I'm not sure how much we'll press on that. So one thing is like this Aristotelian metaphysics stuff, right? So one is like the problem, like the goal of an analysis of change, because he's going for like this potential actual stuff.
This isn't going to
So
work for
like
him.
the goal of an analysis of change is to explain becoming, coming to be, passing to and from, transitions, or other so-called change language. But the Aristotelian analysis explicates actuality and potentiality with the change language its attempts to render an analysis of. So like potentials becoming actual, or potentials coming to be actualized, or things passing from potential beings to actual beings, or transitions from potency to act. So it just seems confused as an analysis. It's also implausible because it assumes ontological pluralism, things that aren't necessarily existent nor non-existent, which almost no metaphysician accepts. It also assumes the felicity of eternalism, which is a very strong position in theories of time. And it's also unparsimonious by introducing uncountably infinite potentials for every single object. And there's also inadequate justification. There's just no good reasons to accept the analysis, and there's readily available plausible alternatives such as x changes if and only if at f at time t, if x is f at time t naught and not f at time t1, and x persists from t naught to t1, or the AT-AT theory of change. And I have a bunch of other objections to the metaphysics and the validity, but I guess we'll get into that because I'm running out of time. But ideally, if we have some time left over, if people donate, I actually would like to make arguments against the doctrine of divine simplicity from in the bounds of Christianity, because I
What?
think there's problems even within the system itself.
It's not even on topic.
And with that, I yield the rest of my 2 seconds.
Perfectly timed. Thank you so much for the great introductions, both of y'all. Let me get you pulled back up here. So, for tonight's debate, as usual, I've got 50 pieces of clothing on. Right now, we're currently sitting at like 17 likes, I think. No, 20 likes. We've got 20 likes. So make sure to slam that like button. It helps a ton. Make sure you all slam that like button. And let's get started here. So in tonight's mega bloodbath, I want you guys to keep away from the low blows. Let's have a good, clean fight. Treat each other with a little bit of respect. It's okay to get heated, but let's try not to absolutely tear into the other person too much. Focus on the arguments, right? With that being said, you guys both ready to get started here?
Yep.
I'm good to go if you can turn off that alarm. Oh,
Is
no,
there
that's
an
my
alarm?
alarm.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops. I was blaming
Yeah,
you.
his arguments were
No,
really
no,
hard.
no.
I couldn't keep up with all that.
Okay, so
But the ones I did keep up
yeah,
with.
and oh yeah, one more time. Super chats add up to 60 additional minutes. So if you have questions, make sure you get those in. It's $1 a minute, right? But I do appreciate y'all being here. Let's go ahead and get started here. Mega bloodbath engaged. You've got an hour.
Perfect.
10 minutes right now, it looks like.
Yeah.
I need to add that soundboard from Futurama with the guy with the claws that goes whoop, 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 whoop.
Yeah, so
You there,
And
Buggy?
Karen Dave says, I very much want to hear a deeper analysis. WRT Divine Simplicity. So I shall add some time. Good luck, debaters. Thank you so much for the comment, Karen, and the $10. That's greatly appreciated. I'll add the time now.
yeah,
You there?
what was the first thing you wanted to start off with? Because you're the one bringing the objections.
Yeah. So let's talk about the argument and what's going on, and let's figure this thing out together. We're gonna work together as a team. So do you think you can give like a more formal analysis of like, well, you said the PSR is everything that exists has a sufficient reason why it is and why it is as it is rather than otherwise. Is
So
that
my definition for PSR that was that every yeah, we'll just start with that.
so? Like X exists has like a sufficient reason for its existence and its essence. I assume that's what you mean by like what it is, or do you mean like something else?
Say that again. Sorry.
When you say like why it is and why it's not otherwise, do you mean like why it has an essence or something?
I by that I mean there's a sufficient reasoning as to like why it exists in the way it does.
Like its
and
mode
why
of
it like why it
existence?
does exist rather than
Yeah. Like it has a reason for why it exists, but you also added like why it is as it is rather than otherwise. But um, so would you say that God has a sufficient reason as to why it exists and why it is as it is rather than otherwise? Are you including like
yeah.
everything?
I would affirm that God has a sufficient reason why he exists. Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that if God has a sufficient reason as to why he exists, then the ontological argument is sound?
What do you mean by the ontological argument?
So the ontological argument is that um, so God has a sufficient reason why he exists. In other words, an explanation for his existence. So really the only where you can go from there is sort of like an ontological argument where God's existence is a part of his essence. Some might say his existence is his essence, or they might say something like his attributes sort of entail his existence. Would you affirm either of those?
I would affirm that like the sufficient reason for God is versus with contingent things.
Yeah, so like would those internal reasons be either that he has existence essentially, or that any of his properties
His
would entail
essence
his
is
existence? Okay, his essences. Thank you. Okay. Contingent reality exists. Let's talk about this. So a lot of times you're just trying to like collect everything or group everything together because you don't want to run into the issue where you're saying, well, what explains X? And I say X0, and I say, well, X1. You say, well, what explains it? And I say X2. And then, because that's sort of going to end the argument. So are you trying to sort of collect all of the contingent objects or contingencies or contingent facts in like this amalgamation of them or something?
are you in reference to premise 2 or premise 3? Because premise 2 is contingent reality exists. Premise 3 is the totality of contingent realities is itself contingent.
Contingent reality exists. Oh, so premise 2, you're just saying, yeah, what do you mean? Are you saying like there's at least one contingent object, or are you saying something?
There's just contingent things that do exist.
Okay, so it's like at least one contingent. So what language would you like to use? Are you saying like an object or like a being or a fact? Is there any particular language you like to use for this?
I mean, just so not really. Like,
I mean, it
you
says
could just say
being.
something that's contingent.
Okay, anything that's contingent, whatever it is. Okay.
Yeah, that would be part of the contingent reality. Anything that exists is
Okay.
contingent.
And I take it that when you say like the totality of contingent of CR, that's sort of like maybe like a set containing all contingent things,
Yeah, like
like
if
a
you
collection of them, like
imagine
C1, C2, C3.
like if you imagine, let's say there's 5 contingent things, the totality of that contingent reality is just those 5 contingent things because they're all that they make up the entirety of the contingent reality.
Yeah, that's actually probably an easier way to look at it. Instead of dealing with infinites, we can just say, well, there's at least 5 contingent objects. Let's look at these. When you say, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is when you say is premise 3 where it itself is contingent. So would that be So it seems to like include itself, because if CR is contingent, then it's an element in the set of contingent things, right?
When I'm saying what I'm saying there with premise 3 is that like if you take the totality of the contingent reality, like those five contingent things, for example, that totality it's self-contingent. Like it doesn't just magically become necessary.
Right, but I'm just asking, does this set include itself as an element? So like let's say CR is the set of C1, C2, and C3. My question is, would you say that CR is the set including CR and C1, C2, C3?
No, like what I'm just saying there is like, imagine there's like 5 dots, and those are all the contingent things, and there's a circle
Mhm.
around them. That's the contingent reality. What I'm saying there is with that contingent reality is it's self-contingent. I mean that entire thing, it's that reality, it's still contingent. It doesn't like become necessary. You get what I'm trying to say?
So like let's say we were collecting a collection of all the contingent things. Would contingent reality be one of those things that we would include?
N- no, that's not how I'm necessarily using contingent reality. Like if there's contingent beings or things that which exist, like a contingent reality, that's just like the term I'm using to describe all those things, all those contingent things. Like if I was trying to lump them into one thing,
Yeah, I understand that, but when you said
it's
it
conceptual.
itself is contingent,
Yeah, by that I
you're
mean
saying,
like that clump that I made, that like conceptual clump where I clumped
hmm
up all the contingent things, like all of contingent reality, all those contingent things are contingent.
but not the set itself, like contingent reality itself?
Well,
Or are
I'm
you
not
just
saying
saying
that
like
like here the contingent reality is like its own existing thing. I get you could say it exists in the sense that there's contingent things that exist, and it's like that's a reality. I could kind of try to argue that, but what all I'm saying is like all those contingent things, that would be the contingent reality, and that's those contingent things are contingent.
Yeah, I get that. Again, I'm stuck on premise 3 where you're saying CR, like the set of all these contingent things, is itself contingent, right? I'm trying to make sense of
Yeah, well,
that,
all
and
I'm
it
saying
seems
there's
as though,
that clump of contingent things. Those contingent things are contingent.
so you're just saying the things within that are contingent,
Yeah.
but the set itself is not contingent. Like the collection of the
Yeah.
contingent things is not itself
Yeah,
contingent.
it's
Okay.
kind of like how, for example, if we take, uh, with contingent reality, if we take like the solar system exists, but it exists like as a system of bodies, as those planets. So it's just like the solar system's just the description for the lump of those bodies, the planets, in its totality. Same thing with the contingent reality. That's just like it exists, but it's just like the description of all the contingent things itself. The same way with like the animal
Okay.
kingdom. The animal kingdom exists not like as an actual substance, but as like the clumping of like all the animals.
Okay, so like the set of animals is not itself an animal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then you said, okay, number 4, no contingent thing can be the sufficient reason of CR.
Yeah.
So if what you're saying is true, like CR is just this collection of C1, C2, C3, and it doesn't contain itself, um, it seems to be explained by its elements. So like, if I'm
What I
thinking
mean
like in
by
set theoretic,
sufficient, like,
okay.
what do you mean it seems to explain its elements? Like, in the sense of sufficient reason.
So like explanations, one type of explanation is like an ontological explanation where the set containing the number 1 is explained in virtue of the fact that the number 1 exists. You see what I'm saying? Like, so like if it's the case that CR is a collection of C1, C2, and C3, CR seems to be explained by the fact that C1 and C2 and C3 obtain.
Sorry, say that one again.
So would you agree that the set containing the number 1 is explained by the number 1? Like, one way of saying it is like the set containing the number 1 exists in virtue of the fact that the number 1 exists.
Well, like the set, when we're talking about the set, like let's take like the number 1 in the same as like an actual like substance. Like the same thing with what I said with the animal kingdom, right? The animal kingdom, like that thing itself isn't like a substance that exists. It just describes the set of like all the animals, right? You could say it's like something, it's conceptual. Or the,
Do you think it's explained by its like members? Like humanity is explained by humans?
you could say like it explains what's within the set. Like the contingent reality just it's the it explains the contingent things in the sense that it just says that there's contingent things that exist, or these things within it are contingent.
Let's say
It
I
wouldn't
have
be like the
a-
explanation in the sense of PSR, because there's not like a grounding reason as to like where did these contingent things come from and why like do they exist as they do. All it is like it's the same thing as saying like a contingent being. It's just calling it contingent. Like that doesn't explain the
let's say-
contingent being. It's just like explaining an observation.
Right. But I'm not trying to explain the elements. I'm just trying to explain the totality. So, like, think of a bowl of grapes, and I have like a collection of grapes. Do you think that that collection of grapes is explained by the grapes?
That collection of grape. What do you mean by explain here?
Well, I guess I should ask, what do you mean by explain? Because you're using like a PSR such that for every fact or thing that obtains, there's a sufficient reason, right? So, like, let's say I have a thing, and that thing is a bowl of grapes. Do you think that bowl, like the collection of grapes, is explained by the grapes? Like, let's say I have one grape over here and one grape over there, and I put them together. Do you think that collection of 2 grapes is explained by each of those individual grapes or not?
No, that wouldn't be like an explanation. Like you could, it wouldn't be like a sufficient reasoning in a sense. It would be an explanation in the sense of like you're explaining that this grape is a grape, but it's not a sufficient reason in the sense that like where like the source of its the grape's existence, and where's the grape come from? What's the grape grounded in? In that sense.
I'm not trying to explain the grape. I'm trying to explain the collection.
Yeah.
Like, I just put 2 grapes together and I try to explain the collection.
As just
Do you
being
think that the
just being
collection-
grapes.
I'm asking if the collection is explained by the individual grapes, or is it explained by something else?
Is the collection of grapes explained by the individual grapes? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you could say in some sense, like if the collection is just describing what's within it, and it's just grapes within it, then the grapes themselves are explaining the collection.
Okay.
Like in that kind of sense, but that's not like a sufficient reason. That doesn't tell you why those grapes exist, where they came from, those types of things. It's like just an
Oh.
observation, essentially.
So, let's say like the fact that there's a grape in a bowl. Do you think me putting the bowl, like the grape in the bowl, explains why the grape is in the bowl, or do you think like that needs more explanation?
Yeah. So what would need to be explained, like a sufficient reasoning, is it like explain would be a sufficient reason. There's a couple things that it gives. It gives the complete set of conditions, like the full ground. It's like the ultimate basis. There's nothing left unexplained about why the thing exists, like where it comes from. It's like it's the ultimate grounding of its existence.
So would you say like an explanation is sort of like I forget the science guy just says, well, in order to create apple pie, you must first invent the universe. Is that sort of like what you take an explanation to be?
That would be like the ultimate sufficient reasoning for those things. Like that could be an example in a larger term. Obviously, I don't believe the universe is a necessary being. But you get what I'm trying to say there. There's explanations in the sense like you can have an explanation in general with like the collection here, where it's just like partial or incomplete, right? Like it explains what's in the collection or what this thing is, but like it's not the sufficient reasoning as to why this thing exists, like where it came from, what created it, so on. I guess it doesn't ground the grape's existence. It just describes what the grape is. It's an observation.
So would you say, like, if I see it's raining, or like let's say I see it's wet on the ground, then I try to cite that it having rained is why the ground is wet, you would say, well, really, that explanation is insufficient unless you cite God?
With rain hitting the ground, the only way to explain it is with God.
Yeah, because you're saying, well, it's not sufficient. You need to explain everything about everything in order to have a sufficient explanation. So I'm asking if the water's on the ground, would I have to cite God in an explanation?
If for it to be the ultimate sufficient reason, yes. In the sense that I'm talking about here, there's two senses you could use sufficient reasons. There could be sufficient reasons in like ordinary situations, like for example, the flame can be the sufficient reason as to why the paper burned. Like, why did the paper get burnt? Why did it turn that hash? Well, because it was set on fire. It was from the flame. But there's only one ultimate sufficient reason, that being like the thing that grounds everything else, and it doesn't itself have another sufficient. Like it is its essence is.
Okay. And I'd have to sort of also cite everything in between, like all of the processes that led to the rain, all the way back to the creation of or the creation of creation, I should say, and then of God's like creative free. Okay.
So like PSR is that it's just saying that something requires a sufficient reason by referencing something prior to it or by its necessity.
Right, but you're just taking, well, unless they give the entire explanatory chain, it's not going to be a sufficient explanation.
There's there's different senses.
And Kurt has a question: does a complete explanation require and thank you so much, Kurt. But does a complete explanation require a teleology, or is final and efficient causation adequate for bug?
Yeah. Well, like I don't see how like. What does he mean by required teleology?
I'm guessing if he asks if you affirm, I guess, Aristotelian causation, where you have
I affirm
formal, material, efficient, and teleal or teleological or whatever.
Yeah. Well, like. So, like for PSR, right? Just to clarify, teleology, all teleology is like the idea that things within nature act for purposes or goals, and that's like excluding whether they're conscious or not. This you could.
Kurt clarified. He says I meant efficient and proximate.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Something I meant efficient and proximate. Yeah. You could say it wouldn't be the ultimate explanation. Teleology wouldn't be the ultimate explanation or sufficient reason. You could say that like it could be in some sense like a sufficient reason as to why this like X carried out the action of Y. So like let's say X did something and that something is Y. Like teleology could be this sufficient explanation as to why X did Y, but it wouldn't be like the sufficient explanation in it's like this one ultimate sufficient explanation because it doesn't explain why X exists entirely, where X is grounded in with like its ultimate sources, those types of things. But it wouldn't even like teleology itself would like we take teleology to be like an actual thing. It itself would also need a sufficient reason. Well, if you take that worldview.
So now I'm on premise 5 where it says an infinite regress of sufficient reasons would itself be contingent. So is that another sort of another collection, but a different collection than the contingent reality?
No, so what I'm saying here is with the infinite regress thing, it's in reference to the idea that, as I said before, like everything has sufficient reasons, but as to why it exists as it is, in the way that it does. The infinite regress is essentially like x. Let's say x is a contingent thing, and then its grounded or its sufficient reason is y, and then that y is z, and so on to infinity, right? I would affirm that this isn't a sufficient reason, and infinite regress would be a violation of PSR, because ultimately that chain in its totality is ultimately contingent and wouldn't be the sufficient reason. It just kind of pushes back this the sufficient reason one step further infinitely, and it doesn't justify the thing. So like in its totality, it's ultimately unjustified.
So, what's strange about this now is because you said, well, X explaining Y doesn't really explain Y, because Y, for a sufficient explanation, you sort of have to cite everything, right? So I'm not sure how there could even be chains of explanation, because let's say like
No,
we're
I'm not
trying to
saying that for
explain
X to explain Y, it has to be the explanation of everything. That's for the one ultimate sufficient reasons. The sufficient reasoning, like as I said, there's ordinary sufficient reasonings, and then there's in the sense of like the one ultimate sufficient reason. All a sufficient reason is something requires sufficient reasoning by referencing something prior to it or by its necessity. So, for example, as I said with the paper, the reason the paper became ash, the sufficient reason for that is because it burned, or because of the flame. The flame burned it, right? That's like ordinary sufficient reason. Then there's the one ultimate sufficient reason. That would be the sufficient reason that grounds all of existence. Not a sufficient reason doesn't have to be the ultimate sufficient reasoning to be the sufficient reasoning. Like, i.e., for Y to be the sufficient reason for X, it doesn't need to be the explanation of everything in the universe. It just needs to be the sufficient reason for X. Y can
So when
have
you
its
say
sufficient reasoning itself.
so when your
i.e.
argument uses
Yeah,
when
sorry.
your argument uses the phrase sufficient reason, are you referring to like the immediate reason, or when you say
Well,
sufficient
all the
reason in the
sufficient
argument, do you
reasoning
mean
it's it's something that prior to it that explains why it is as it is.
would that include everything to be
Reasons.
sufficient?
Would that sufficient reason need to include, for example, let's say
For all
like,
the reasons, like I remember when you cite anything, for it to be sufficient, do you need to cite God?
well, for the entirety of existence to be sufficient, there would have to be like an ultimate sufficient reasoning. But let's say like with a
No, I'm
grape,
saying just for like a little
grape
thing. Yeah, the
sufficient
grape. Do I need
reason
to cite God
for any sufficient reason, it doesn't. You don't need to cite God. Like
for that to be a sufficient
example,
reason?
for the
Okay.
paper turning into ash, the sufficient reasoning for that would be the flame that burned it.
So I can
Yeah.
so like when I go back to my example and I say, well, the ground is wet because it rained. So would that you saying
would
that
be a
now that's a
sufficient
sufficient
reason.
Okay. All right.
But that wouldn't like be
Um,
ultimately there would need the totality of existence would need or like the universe, and that would need ultimately require God. But there can be sufficient reasonings in the sense of like the ground is wet because it rained, or the paper became ash because the flame burned it.
okay. Um, so now we're looking at the infinite regress. So let's say I have, C1, C2, C3 all the way back to infinity, like an infinite past model, where C1 is explained by C2, C2 is explained by C3, and you're saying that the chain C1 to C infinity is contingent,
Yeah, it's ultimately
right?
so if you're taking an infinite regress of sufficient reasons, then it's either claiming that everything in that chain is contingent, or you could also claim that everything is necessary. So with an infinite regress of contingent causes, right? that chain, if you take it just to be infinite regress of contingent causes, is ultimately contingent, as that's what we would affirm if you do affirm premise 3 and premise 4, that the totality of contingent reality is itself contingent. Sorry, just premise 3. That ultimate chain is contingent. It's not the ultimate sufficient reasoning. All it's doing is just pushing the sufficient reasoning back to a previous contingent thing over and over again. There's no like ultimate grounding. Or you could take the worldview where there's an infinite regress, but it's everything in there is necessary. If you're taking that worldview, as the guy in my chat said with imperfect, everything, if for something to be necessary, right, it has to exist as it does in all possible worlds. Which means that things such as like atom division, or like even, for example, us talking, we would be violating that because we went from a state of not talking to talking. Those would be changes, so we wouldn't be necessary, would be qualified as necessary. As well as, for example, us growing, that's a change. Needs to be a sufficient reasoning as to why that occurs. We're also dependent on air and those types of things. There's sufficient reasonings within that. So the idea that everything's necessary wouldn't work out, and the idea that there's infinite regress of contingent causes would just ultimately be contingent. It doesn't justify or ground it.
All right. Seems a little confusing. I mean, that's not even what I was saying, but it's interesting. You're saying that necessitarianism entails, what exactly you think necessitarianism entails? A violation of the PSR?
No, like if you take that everything is necessary.
Yeah, that's necessitarianism.
Yeah.
Or fatalism, I guess some people call it.
Yeah. If you're taking everything exists as necessary, then that wouldn't follow, because
from change. You're saying that change and necessitarianism are incompatible?
I'm saying that just the current world and necessitarianism is incompatible, because something necessary is something that cannot not exist. And if it were to, like, for example, with us, change would be an aspect that would reject necessity, because that we exist in a possible world in which we don't have to exist in that specific mode. We can exist in different ways, which then means if we're claiming to be necessary, right? Let's say X is necessary. X must exist in all possible worlds. But if X can be different and exist in a possible world, then X isn't necessary. So since we are existing differently,
necessitarians,
then we couldn't be
like the point of necessitarianism is just to say that the only possible world is the actual world. That's the position. So
well, I was taking
when you refer to other
necessitarianism in the sense that
possible
everything's
worlds,
necessary.
Yeah, and I'm telling you what that means in possible world semantics is just to say that the actual world is the only possible world. That's what they mean.
Yeah. Okay. And then you're taking a possible world in which we can, are you affirming that we're necessary beings too?
No, I'm just trying to understand your qualms with necessitarianism. I thought it was sort of interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we could get back to the argument if it's sort of like, it's probably off topic. We should probably get back to the thing anyway, but
sure.
So this chain of contingent beings or facts or objects, you don't think that the chain is explained by its like members?
It wouldn't be there wouldn't be an ultimate explanation. All it's doing is pushing it back, the sufficient reasoning back one step behind it infinitely. So X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E forever. It ultimately isn't grounding the totality of the chain. The totality of the chain is still contingent.
Right, I'm just saying, like, when I take a collection of things, to me, like, the collection is explained by its elements.
The collections explain. How
Yeah.
would that like? How would that?
I'm not
like,
sure what else
debunk
could
what I
explain
said?
it.
'Cause what I'm saying here is, with an infinite regress of contingent things, that infinite regress in its totality is still contingent. It's not. It wouldn't be a sufficient reason. So like, that was what you just said. Like, debunk or like give a possible explanation. as to how there
Well,
can
you're
be.
saying well you're saying the set of this contingent chain is itself contingent, and you're saying well like it needs an explanation, and it just seems to be at least immediately intuitive to me that collections are explained by their elements.
Well, collections in the sense like you can have the collection
Or
of
sets or whatever you want to call it.
like the totality of contingent reality. All that collection is explaining there that everything within inside of it is contingent, but it's not the sufficient reasoning. It wouldn't be a sufficient reason. It's just like a description. It's not.
No, I'm
That
trying to
doesn't
explain the set.
why this contingent, let's say within the contingent reality, why X, Y, and Z exist. It's not grounding that. It's literally just describing that X, Y, and Z are contingent. That wouldn't
No,
be.
I'm
a
not
sufficient
saying
reason.
this. I'm not saying the set explains the elements. I'm saying the elements can explain the set.
Okay, PSR is not the same as explaining a set. PSR is just referencing the grounding for a thing's existence.
Okay, I guess we could
Something
talk
prior
about
to it that grounds its
definitions. All right, I guess we can start getting into definitions and analysis. So, what do you mean when you say grounding? What does that mean?
By grounding,
Yeah. Like if
Well-
P grounds Q and P is the fundans or the fundatia and Q is the fundatum or fundata. What is that relation to you?
yeah, so like if you want to take the philosophical definition, I'll write it out for the stream too. Grounding is the relationship in which one thing exists, obtains, or is true because of something deeper or more fundamental.
Hey, Howdy, when
So-
you're taking notes, can you mute your microphone, please?
Oh, I think we were both typing, but
Oh, gotcha. Never mind then.
Or
s-
you could also that's just basically saying another way you could word it. Just grounding is just the relation of metaphysical dependence in which one fact obtains in virtue.
all right, that's pretty close. So when I think of a set of or a collection of objects, I think that obtains in virtue of the fact of each of its individual members or constitutive components, like mereological or ontological dependence.
That's what you're taking grounding to mean.
In this context, so like one type of plausible grounding explanation is the sandcastle in the sand. It seems to me as though the sandcastle is obtained in virtue of the fact that there's sand.
That that's
So like the parts
for
explain
the
the
same
whole,
thing. It would be like this.
or
If
the
there's a
or the
marble
pole is
statue,
dependent upon
the
the
statue
parts.
the marble statue exists in virtue of the marble being shaped in that form, and
Yeah.
because the marble is more fundamental. Yeah, it's just what I described.
Okay.
The statue's
so when I
existence
take
is
a
grounded in them, and then the marble would have its own grounding. So on and so forth.
yeah, so when I take like a collection, then that would just be grounded in its parts. Like the sandcastle is grounded in the sand, and the marble statue is grounded in at least
Marble.
partially grounded in the marble. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could even say like the intentions of the artist and a bunch of other stuff, but at least partially grounded in its components. And so when you say, well, there's this chain of like contingent things, then you're saying what explains the chain? I mean, it has like these elements as
Well,
components
no,
of it.
basically what I'm saying here, it's not necessarily like, I guess you could say what explains the chain, but like ultimately,
Or what
this
grounds the chain, I guess.
This chain can't just be an infinite regress of previous contingent things. There would have to be an ultimate, like an end to that, and that would be a necessary being. And
Okay.
I believe like I've already explained this. I think, didn't I already address this argument?
I'm not sure. So what was your response to there being an infinite chain of contingent beings or facts?
Yeah. If there's an infinite regress of just contingent reasons, that just there's sufficient reasoning is another reason before that and so on, that's contingent. the ultimate chain, the chain in its totality is ultimately contingent. So it's not grounding or explaining anything. So it would
Yeah.
violate PSR.
I'm not saying like the chain explains each of its components. I'm saying the components explain the chain or ground the chain. Like the chain obtains
That's
in
not
virtue of the
that's not
fact
an
of each of its
explanation.
components.
That's not how like
Okay.
that wouldn't be a sufficient reason in within like PSR sense. That's just describing the chain. Like the same thing with the animal kingdom and the animals, right? Like the animal kingdom just exists conceptually. It's not it's not a thing. It's
Yeah,
just
but
a
you're
description.
asking what grounds or explains or is the
Yeah,
sufficient reason for the collection, and
the
I'm saying
animal
it's the
kingdom right there,
members.
right? It's just
Yeah.
it's like the name for the totality of the animals, but it isn't the
Yeah.
sufficient reason or explanation why, like, let's say this zebra exists, like what grounds this zebra's existence, or what grounds this lion's existence. All it's saying is that the zebra and the lion are animals.
Yeah. But you're saying, well, what explains the collection? And I'm saying it's the members. Maybe we should move on because I think maybe we're talking past each other a little bit on this point. Because we're on a timer, you know.
Yeah.
Therefore, there must exist a necessary being. So, one of my responses to it being a necessary being was there's other sufficient reasons on the table other than beings. So, let's see if I can find my response. So some again other options on the table is like non-causal explanation or like like a non-causal explanation because like a being explaining a being is like concrete and causal, but you could have stuff like explanations in terms of grounding or functional realization or logical or structural constraints or essentialist
Sufficient reasoning
explanations.
would be in reference to what grounds it, something. That would be a sufficient, and it's the thing that it would be prior. So like, like let's say X. The sufficient reasoning for X would be Y, and Y is prior to X, and Y is what grounds X. All sufficient.
Yeah, I'm just saying like there's non-causal reasons or explanations on the table that are not
Like
from beings or the activities of beings.
how
S-
how would this like make it so that there can be contingent reality that isn't ultimately grounded in necessary being?
Yeah, there could be a sufficient reason or explanation that's non-causal.
Like what? Like okay, so then what? How did these things come to be?
Like grounding or functional realization or logical or structural constraints. Like again, like
Like
an example,
so,
a
if it's
silly example would be
non-causal,
like there's
well, real
yeah.
quickly, if it's non-causal, then like how and so instead of replacing the necessary being here, it's like that explanation is like it's a non-causal explanation. Right? Then how
Mhm.
did these things come to exist?
Let me ask. Let's start with this. Do you accept? Well, I mean, you have to because you just accepted grounding. Maybe you have a different understanding of grounding, but do you accept that there are non-causal explanations?
What would be?
So, a non-causal explanation is like a fact that obtains in virtue of another fact that don't stand in causal relation. So, like the fact that 4 is even, or something like that.
Fact that for 4 is even is non-causal? Well, the sufficient reasoning would just be with like this system of math.
Yeah. Let's say like 2 exists, or like it's sort of strange, like because I mean it's going to depend like on your axioms or whatever, but you could say, well, 3 exists because 2 exists, and then the succession operator exists, and it seems pretty. Most people take that there is explanations for like mathematical facts, right? It's like not all of these facts are like independent and brute. Most people take it that facts about mathematics are derivable or deducible from other facts, like Euclid's elements. You get your 5,
Yeah. So real
whatever, and
quickly,
then you
I
can
was
create all your circles and
yeah.
stuff.
Well, I originally asked you like how something non-causal, like replacing the necessary being here, could explain the existence, would be the sufficient explanation for the existence of all these things, like what caused these things to exist.
Right, and I was just asking if you accepted any non-causal explanations for any things. Like, do you think
Well,
the
like
activity of a...
that's kind of a red herring because it doesn't address my question.
Okay, so, I mean, if you do accept non-causal explanations, then I'm just going to cite it as a non-causal explanation.
Yeah, I was asking for an example, like if you posit a
For being
non-causal
even.
explanation, then I'm just asking you then what created these contingent realities? What created them? Since it's the thing that was supposedly creates them, at least within my worldview, that necessary being is being replaced with something that's non-causal, doesn't create.
Well,
Are you
I guess you're
affirming
not a
brute
Thomist.
fact
It was
then?
funny as... Huh?
Are you affirming like they just
Well,
exist because they do?
I affirm that there are brute facts, but I'm just saying I'm just rolling with the argument, and I'm saying that there's non-causal explanations that don't cite the activities of beings to explain
And
facts.
then what would
Like
be the
the fact
explanation
that
for
4
these
is
things being
even...
created then? If it wasn't the necessary being.
Again, there's lots of options on the table: grounding, functional realization, logical or structural constraints, or essentialist explanations.
So let's start.
And you'd have to, and
pick
it's sort
one.
of the onus is on you to sort of rule all of them out. Okay, rule out. I don't know. I guess we can start with grounding. What rules out a grounding explanation?
Okay, how would a grounding explanation like explain how if there's a necessary beings replaced with like a non-causal sufficient reasoning, how things can be created, like what created everything else? How does grounding explain?
Well, I mean, that's sort of a question. You're supposed to be providing an argument to prove that
What I
grounding is
asked you
impossible.
originally was the explanation where if you didn't have a necessary being and it was just a non-causal sufficient reasoning, I was asking you to explain then how that everything was created.
Well, if it's the case that everything is created, it could be explained in terms of grounding. I'm not sure why that would.
How would grounding
be
explain, like, for example, like how everything was created?
I mean, I don't have to, but just for fun, I could cite Parmenides' metaphysical explanation: is that what is, and what is not is unthinkable. Like nothing can't exist. So
How does it
something has to
explain what
exist.
created these things?
It explains why there's why things exist. Is that it? Nothingness can't exist. So something has to exist. That explains
Okay,
it.
but that could be a necessary being. That like that doesn't
That's
explain why. Like, okay, so the one thing, even within your worldview, right? The one thing that has
This
to
isn't my
exist-
worldview,
Well,
by the way.
like
but-
with the hypothetical, that one thing could be the
Yeah.
non-causal thing. So that explanation there, it doesn't explain how everything was created given the non-causal like sufficient reason that you provided.
No, I'm just saying. I'm just citing a grounding
that's what I was
explanation for why
asking you.
things could exist.
So like if I'm asking you this
So the
question
grounding
and you're
explanation
answering
for why
something, but it
things-
doesn't answer the question, then it's just like a red herring. You know what I mean?
I'm trying my best. I think you're just sort of conceptually confused. Maybe I'll
Well,
answer this again and then we'll move on
okay.
if you don't understand it. So again, my answer is to say that non-causal explanations are on the table. One of them, among many, is a grounding explanation. An example of like a metaphysical grounding explanation is that of like Parmenides, who would say that being is and non-being is unthinkable. And so it's the case of metaphysical necessity that things exist, and that explains why things
at
exist,
least
is because
one
it's
thing
necessary for
exists.
them to exist.
Yeah, it shows that at least one thing needs to exist. So that wouldn't explain why, like, so for example, within this hypothetical, right, you're holding to like a non-causal, like, being that is replacing.
No.
necessary being.
Beings are like concrete. No.
Beings, non-causal thing that replaces, or
yeah, like a metaphysical principle.
a non-causal thing. Okay.
Yeah, like a principle, or like.
But that
like,
doesn't
like a
so
law
that
of
would be
logic or something.
Does it exist, this non-causal thing, within this worldview?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if with Parmenides, he's saying, with what he's saying there, at least nothing can exist, so at least one thing would have to exist. So the non-causal thing existing would satisfy that. So the explanation you're giving here wouldn't explain why, like, let's say the non-causal thing is Y, it wouldn't explain how X was created. Because all it's holding to is
I'm
that
not
at
saying
least
X
one
was
thing
created.
Okay.
I'm
So
not saying it was created. I'm just saying why things could be.
are you holding
like,
to like there were things that were always existing and then those things
Yeah,
were
like,
ultimately
well,
just created everything else?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's open. Like it could be the case that everything. Well, I guess on Parmenides' account, it would have to be eternal. So yeah, I guess I should go with that.
Okay.
So yeah, things exist because they exist of metaphysical necessity.
And these things aren't necessary beings. They would have potential, these eternal things.
Yeah, I would reject an Aristotelian account of change, potential actual language like that. I think the Aristotelian metaphysics is like outdated and confused.
Why does potential and actual not work?
So when you're talking about what you're trying to do is explain.
So
Okay.
real quickly, actually, we don't even have to get into this. To stay more on topic, right? So the things that are existing eternally, they're contingent things. Right?
Well, we're gonna have to get us in the next one anyway, because like premise 6 and 7 is about pure act and stuff. So maybe we should just go ahead and get on into it.
Real quickly, if you're holding that these eternal things that created everything else that always existed, they're contingent things, right?
I'm not saying they're created. Obviously, if they're eternal, they're uncreated.
Yeah, no,
like you seem really confused about
right?
language.
Or are they necessary? Because something contingent, its existence is dependent on something else.
Like existence, like things existing would be necessary. Now they could, Parmenides wouldn't like this, but yeah, I could affirm that they undergo change.
Are these eternal things that created everything else, are they contingent or are they necessary?
So yeah, that would be necessary, metaphysically necessary.
Okay, so they're like, their existence is grounded in their own nature. They're not dependent on like external cause or anything else.
I would say probably like even non-being things like laws or abstracta, nomology, anything is probably going to be grounded. If what we take grounding to mean as like in virtue of a way thing can be, then I'm probably going to say that is everything that I can think of is going to be grounded by logic, including God if he were to exist. But
the laws of logic wouldn't be necessary truths, but they're hold true in every possible world.
Yeah, possible worlds are as big as you can get. Possible worlds is to say that all worlds in which the laws of logic obtain. To deny that, you'd have to affirm impossible worlds or something.
Okay. So you're holding to these eternal things that are necessary. That's perfect.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's a possible.
Well, you said
it's probably even a plausible
for them to be like eternal. Like, didn't you say that they would have to be necessary in this scenario?
For what to be eternal?
With the scenario we're giving, with like these eternal
the material,
things
like the being, like the laws or the logic or all of it.
Within your worldview, where there's like a non-causal.
This isn't my worldview.
Or the hypothetical worldview, where there's this non-causal sufficient reason, and then there's these things that have eternally existed that were caused everything else to exist. Didn't you say that these?
Well, they're non-causal explanations, so they wouldn't cause anything to exist. It's a non-causal explanation.
How did things get like come into existence? What caused
they didn't come into existence? It would be eternal.
So like you and I, were we eternal?
No.
Okay. And we would go back, and ultimately there would have to be something that is eternal.
I mean, on this, it would just be like being is eternal, or existence,
what are you defining?
Or reality.
Being?
What is?
Because like being, from my understanding, being is just that which exists.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
A being would be like a thing that exists.
Yeah, Yeah, things that exist always exist on this this view.
So you and I exist, so we always existed.
No, I said things that always exist, or
So there are
There are
things
there
that
are
always
always
exist.
there. No,
things that-
there are no, no, there are, well, yeah, there is that too, but there, in terms of like material things, I mean, this could be any world, but we can just make it easy and simplify and say material. Like there's always material things that exist. Not that every material thing exists, but there's always something material existing. The
Okay.
laws would be
So
non-material,
even
but they would
within this,
also
you're affirming
exist.
that there's things that eternally exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Well, yeah. If you mean by things, we were
Like
talking about like the
being.
laws.
There's
Yeah.
being that
There's
which
always
exists.
being.
There's something that exists, like,
Yeah.
eternal.
Yeah. There's always something
And
that exists.
this caused everything else.
No.
Well, if it didn't,
It's a non-causal
then-
explanation.
Well, the non-causal explanation doesn't explain how we came into existence. Remember, we went through that.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
the
I
change is
explained, like,
explained.
ultimately, if we keep going back, there would have to be something that caused everything else that always existed. Because if it didn't always exist, then the non-causal thing couldn't be the explanation of existence. We went through this. So you affirmed that there was something that existed that created everything else that was eternal.
No.
We just went through
Didn't
this.
create
Okay,
anything.
so
It's
then
uncreated.
if
It's
it's the
eternal. If it's
non-causal
eternal, it's
thing-
uncreated.
Okay. No, I mean, like, that, so with the non-causal thing being the eternal thing, let's take you and I. We came into existence. We're not eternal. You already affirmed that.
Also, we might not even. We probably wouldn't exist in this possible world, but assuming we did exist in that possible world,
Something previous to
sure,
it.
I can
created
accommodate
us,
that too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. Is this just an
Mhm.
infinite regress of previous things that created us?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you would be violating PSR, right? Because it's just an infinite regress sufficient of contingent reasons.
Well, one is like, in this world, it could be necessitarian, but I'll accept that it's contingent. But yeah, what's the argument that this world violates PSR?
Yeah, well, if it's an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons, then the ultimate chain, the chain in its totality is just contingent. So it doesn't explain its own existence. As
The chain
by
is explained by
law, the
being exists
definition
of
of
metaphysical necessity. Yeah, the totality of like temporal things is explained by the metaphysical principle that being is.
it's the sufficient reasoning for the contingent, the infinite regress is a metaphysical
Yeah.
principle.
Principle, yeah.
Okay, and what is that metaphysical principle?
That what is and what is not is unthinkable. Like it's impossible for nothing to exist.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that then an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons can exist. Like there's that wouldn't explain that.
I know.
Like there's other worldviews in which there isn't an infinite regress that's sufficiently fit that criteria of
Yeah.
that metaphysical principle you have. So that wouldn't be an explanation for the infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons. That's just like
And
that's
nobody-
presupposing that there is an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reason. It's not an explanation of that.
Yeah.
No-
I mean, okay, sorry.
Well,
Oh
if you're
yeah, I
gonna
was just gonna say,
then-
and nobody on fire asked Bug if you're going to take a contingentarian stance. Don't you need to provide a reason for the assumption that things could have been otherwise? Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, the idea that something could exist otherwise is grounded in really something that couldn't exist otherwise is ultimately going to be grounded with laws of logic and those types of things. If it's impossible, or the only way something couldn't have existed otherwise is if it would be a logical impossibility, that being it would violate a law of logic. But so like I could demonstrate even with myself that like for example, if I was born without a right arm, that's a logical possibility. It wouldn't violate, for example, the law of non-contradiction. So like that would be like the grounding or reason for the assumption that things could have been otherwise. But I think we've already believed that in contingent things, right, Howdy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm okay. I mean, I could argue against that. What's funny is I could even argue against causation.
Well, like I don't know why
But
you would
it's
be arguing against your own beliefs. You know what I mean?
no, I'm just saying like because we're just sort of probing the like probability of your argument being sound, and like all of these alternatives, the more alternatives I lay out on the table, as long as they're like not refuted, they sort of decrease the probability of the soundness of the argument.
Okay.
But I guess to move on more closely to the argument would be like, so I could give you my objections also to the Aristotelian account of change being like potential and actual. So like the goal of an analysis of change is to explain becoming or coming to be or passing to and from or transitioning in like change language. But the Aristotelian analysis explicates actuality and potentiality with the change language it should be attempting to render an analysis of. So you have to say things like potentials becoming or actuals, or potentials coming to be actualized, or things passing from potential beings to actual beings, or of transitions from potency to act. Um, so it's like explicitly circular, and it's not really providing an analysis of
Wait,
change.
what's circular? Like what specifically?
So, an analysis of change is to explain becoming, coming to be, and transitions. And the Aristotelian analysis of change explains potentials and actuals in terms of becoming and coming to be and
Okay, so
transitioning.
well, like within metaphysics, like potency is just defined as something has the capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing. And actuality is just the realized state of the potentia, something that already is what it is potentially able to be. So like with those definitions there, right? How would potential and actual, like the reason I would affirm that potential and actual potency and actuality would have to exist in a worldview where you affirm change exists is because if you deny, let's take potency for example. If you deny potency, you're saying, let's say X has the potential to become hot, right? If you're saying potency does not exist, you're denying that something has the capacity to become something else, but it's not yet that thing. So you're denying that X has the capacity or ability to become hot. And if you're affirming this worldview where it does change and X becomes hot, you're violating a law of logic because you're saying at P, it can become hot, not P, it can't become hot.
Just really like, I hate to be like meta commentary, but like you seriously think denying like Aristotelian metaphysics of change entails like a contradiction? Is that the argument?
Well, I just demonstrated how the denial if you affirm a worldview in which change occurs and you deny that potential exists, it would violate the law of non-contradiction.
Sure. I would love to see an argument for that one day, maybe.
I just provided.
Okay, I'm gonna pass over that. So, did you you used the word becoming, right, in that analysis, or no?
What do you mean becoming? I said
Yeah, you said like if
X
something
has the
has the
potential to
potential
become hot,
to become hot. Yeah, so you
yeah.
use the word become in your analysis.
and X becomes hot. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So again, my critique is that the analysis of change is an analysis of what it means to become, and you're using the word become in your analysis of potential, because that's why it's circular.
Well, you could say X has the potential. Like, how would that be an invalid
What does it mean?
analysis?
What does it mean to have potential? I mean,
something has the capacity
there's no
to become
such thing
something
as
else, but is not yet that thing.
yeah, yeah. Because an analysis of change is an attempt to explain becoming, and your analysis of becoming in terms of potential references the word becoming to explicate itself. So it's circular.
Okay, and real fast, that's the initial hour. We have 20 additional minutes from Super Chats. If y'all are enjoying the conversation, feel free to submit a Super Chat with a question for your debaters or a comment, and that'll get displayed on the screen or asked or stated. We have 40 additional extension minutes available from Super Chat still, so if you're enjoying the debate or you want to hear more, this is a good time to get Super Chats in. I'm starting the additional 20 minutes right now.
Yeah. So wait, how? Where's the circularity here? Again?
You're explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming.
Okay. And potential. Okay. Yeah. Well, to become something. I would say. I'm explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming. Well, I don't see the logical problem with that. No.
No, it's just a bad analysis because it's circular. It's also implausible because it assumes ontological pluralisms and the felicity of eternalism, but yeah, that's a bad theory. So I can give you like a modern theory. One of them would be like the at theory, where x changes if and only if x is f at time t naught and not f at time t1, and x persists from t naught to t1. It's like a modern metaphysics of change.
Okay. Well, potency. Okay. Potency isn't defined in like in the analogy I gave. It's not defined in terms of becoming. Potential is defined in terms of being, that which exists. Like the
Okay,
idea
what's
of
your definition of
becoming is
potential?
derived from like the prior distinction between potency. I
What's your
define as
definition
something
of-
has the well, something has the capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing.
Did you use the word become in that analysis?
Yes.
You're right. So it's circular.
Even then, I don't see how it's logically invalid though. You could just affirm that it's like a tautology.
Well, logical,
okay, so
validity is really briefly though. Validity has to do with like arguments and whether or not they use like rules of inferences that are valid, like modus ponens or modus tollens. So if any like your argument's invalid, right? The analyses aren't valid or invalid. They can just be like either like incoherent or just like bad theories or analyses.
I mean, you could just say potential to heat up, and then X heats up. And then you could do P, it can heat up.
We're going in
Not P, it
circles
can't.
on circularity. Maybe you can go back because
Well,
we're like wasting time.
You just remove becoming. So X has the potential to
Sure.
heat up. Your affirming change occurs, and X heats up. But you're denying potential exists, i.e., something having the capacity to become something else. So you're denying that in this scenario
I
that potential.
I don't deny that things have capacities. That's just not what potentials are in the Aristotelian metaphysic.
Okay. Well, from how I define potential and actual, would you
Yeah.
affirm that, like, that understanding?
Things have the capacity for change. Like
So
you're saying like
potential is something has
dispositions
the capacity
exist.
to become something else, but is not yet that thing. Actuality is just
Yeah, I
a
reject that
realized-
analysis because it's a bad analysis because it's circular. And it's also implausible because
is
it
it
assumes
circular?
ontological. It also assumes ontological pluralism and assumes the felicity of eternalism. It's also unparsimonious. And there's also readily available plausible alternatives that like fucking blow Aristotelian metaphysics out of the water, like the at theory of change. But again, I reject it because it's circular. It's just a bad analysis.
Okay, where's the circularity?
Because you're explaining potential, or you're explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming.
I didn't even
or
use
transitions
I
in
didn't
terms
even
of
use
potency and
become
act.
in my
The last thing you
scenario of
said used
change.
that word becoming.
X
all right.
X has the potential to heat up.
Give me your analysis of
change occurs,
change.
X
Okay,
heats up.
let's write it out. X changes if and only if. X changes if and only if. Okay, what's your analysis of change?
Okay, change is the move from
You-
the state
you
of potential
goober.
to actual.
Moving from a state to a state, moving from a state of potential to a state of actual. You remember when I said things coming from potential beings to actual beings? That's part of the analysis of change, or that's the words or the language that analyses of changes are attempting to explicate. And again, your analysis of change is using the language that's attempting to explain potential and actual. So it's circular. And this is why it's rejected by modern metaphysics.
So
When you
change.
say moving
so
from,
change.
when you use the words from and to, that's change language.
And
And you're explaining.
The point is, it's explaining how. change occurs. It's possible for change to occur because something has potential and then it moves to become actual.
Yeah, and it changes, right?
That's what change is.
Yeah, change is change. Great. That's an amazing analysis, dude.
Well, that's just a tautology. Change is
Yeah,
change.
it's an awful
yes.
analysis. This is why no one accepts it.
Do you disagree that change is change?
I think that that's an awful analysis. That's like saying change is like a primitive notion. You're saying that there is no analysis of change, in which case we would also jettison Aristotelian metaphysics anyway, because then change would be a primitive.
How did I provide no analysis of change?
I'm not saying you didn't. I'm saying it's a bad analysis. Or when you say change is change, that's a tautology. That's just a bad analysis. It's not an analysis. An analysis is when you have an analysandum and an analysans, where you explicate the analysandum in terms of analysans, like other terminology. So again, an ADAT theory of change would be x changes if and only if x is f at time t naught and not f at time t1, and x persists from t naught to t1. Doesn't use any change language, right?
So, okay, so from that, right? Your problem is in describing what change is. I'm using the terms from and to.
Partially that, but also like how are you defining potential and actual is also going to include change language as well.
Something has the capacity to become, but is not yet that thing.
That's not Aristotelian metaphysics, but like you can redefine potential and actual. Like maybe what you mean by potential is what everyone else means by disposition, right?
Well, like I asked you,
that's not Aristotelian
with
metaphysics.
my definition, if you agreed with that and you disagreed with that understanding, that it wouldn't work. So do you?
Yeah, you're just lost. I didn't see that things don't have dispositions. I in fact affirmed that things have dispositions.
So you would affirm then that my understanding of potential.
Not sure. You said a thing has potential is just to say that a thing has like dispositions.
No, potential.
And what do you mean by actual?
Something has the capacity to become something else, but it's not yet that thing. Actuality is just the realized state of the
to
potential.
Become. Yeah, well, yeah. When you say become, yeah, then it's another level of circularity because becoming is change language. Again, try not to use becoming or coming to be or passing from and to or transitions. There's also other change languages too, but those are like the main ones that a theory of change would be trying to render an analysis of, right?
Is
but
having
you're
the
like
capacity
totally lost
to
on
become
this, so we should like
the
move
same
on.
as changing?
You're saying having a disposition isn't the same as changing.
Okay, so then there wouldn't be a problem here.
Again, the problem is even
That's
in
not
what
circular, then.
you're saying is also circular. You just used the words becoming when you defined potential, and you also said moving from
something else
to. Yeah, that's become. Become is a change term.
Yes, but right there,
become is the word that become is the word
change.
that an analysis of change is trying to explain. So you're explaining
when
becoming
I say
in terms
something
of
has the capacity to become something else. That doesn't mean that thing changed. Not the same as change.
I'm saying that analysis is circular.
How is it circular though?
Because you're explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming. That's a circle. We should move on though, because you're like getting super bodied on this, and I feel bad.
What's the problem with that? That's just a tautology.
I'll concede this because I feel bad bodying you on this so badly. I'll just concede this point. And that's we're going. And speaking of circularity, we're going in circles. Yeah, let's talk about principle of. Let's see what we got on principle of proportionate causality.
Yeah.
So, what's your argument against emergent phenomena?
Yeah, like apparent emergent phenomena doesn't mean that like that's actually what's happening, or what it appears to be the case, or with our current knowledge. I would justify, like, if the rejection of PPC would be a violation of PSR.
Sure. Are you
Like, do you
intelligent?
agree with that?
No. But
No.
are you intelligent?
Sure. What's the?
Are your atoms intelligent?
I don't know. Not in the same way of like being
Right.
conscious. I don't.
Right.
The atoms are conscious.
Yeah, this is how bad, right? The metaphysics are is we don't even know whether or not atoms are intelligent. Are atoms wet?
Well, how does this have any relevance?
They're examples of emerging phenomena or emergent phenomena, which is a
So,
counterexample to the
so apparent.
PPC analysis of.
Apparent. It
Mhm.
appears that there's. Is it
Yeah,
possible? Is it possible that the idea of consciousness isn't?
the atoms are wet and
it-
intelligent on your view. Yeah, that's awesome, dude.
Is it no? Is it possible that consciousness?
Logically possible, sure. It's just an awful theory. Imagine,
That's
right?
not
We
what I'm
walk up
saying.
to
Is
people
it
and say, "Hey, here's
possible
my
that
theory."
consciousness can be not grounded in something physical, but could be, like, for
Sure.
example. Okay. So
Well,
this
it
presupposes
depends what
like
we mean
this
by
physical
grounded.
sense.
Not totally grounded. Not totally grounded.
Well, like
It's probably partially
this is
grounded. 'Cause I don't think
presupposing-
you can be conscious without like a body.
within, obviously within the Christian paradigm, we believe there's consciousness outside of a body. It doesn't necessitate.
Now,
right?
there's Christian physicalists. You don't have a stranglehold
Within
on
the Eastern
dualism.
Orthodox position, we hold that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. For the principle of proportionate causality,
Mm-hmm.
we've already explained what that is. If you were to deny the
Actually, let's see if you know what that is. Do you
I've
know what a
already
formal? Okay.
something,
Oh, do you? Let me see your definition.
I even explained it in my intro.
Yeah. So maybe I forgot. What do you think let me see. Formally, to possess in the exact manner or kind as it appears in the effect. So it's like a phenomenal analysis.
No,
like
so something for the something formally is just like the cause, what's in the effect. The cause actually has that. So like, let's say the effect has X. If you're talking about it formally, the cause.
Well, the
has
effect
X.
is X. Is probably the better way of saying it, but yeah, it's like identical reinstantiation, or like if you read like Phaser, he'll say things like for like, or other like ways of this is like abscission and inheritance. What do you think the difference between virtually and let me see your definition? Do I have those? Virtually, to have the power or capacity to produce it either from external sources or by possessing it in potentia. See,
Yeah, there's two
virtually
understandings.
contains a tree. Okay. Oh, here's one. Eminently, to possess in a higher or superior way. What does that mean? That's interesting.
Yeah, in the sense of you possess the let's say like we imagine X attribute as a spectrum where there's levels to it. Let's be like X, there's base level 1, then 2, then 3. The eminent form for, let's say, level 1 would be level 2 and 3. For level 2, it'd be level 3. The way we would just determine eminence is something eminent is like ontological. It would be tied in with ontological superiority.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You're saying just like the properties in a thing are like maximally in the cause, like the property of the effect is maximally in the cause.
Possesses that thing in a higher or more superior way. So like even with goodness, right? Like let's say X, let's just say there's goodness, right? The effect possesses goodness at level 1, and the cause possesses it at level 3. The cause can produce an effect with level 1 goodness because it possesses goodness eminently or in a higher, more superior way than the effect. But if the cause, let's say, had 0 goodness, or let's say 1 goodness, and the effect had 2 goodness, the cause wouldn't be the sufficient reasoning for the goodness in the effect, because the effect.
Hold on, I have to respond to a
it.
comment. It's eminent with E-M-I-N-E-T, like E-M-I-N-E-N-T. It's not like eminent like inherence or like eminent as in like right now. It's like you can think of like preeminent, like sort of like anyways. So what was the argument against the possibility of emergent phenomena?
Yeah. It with denying, with rejecting the principle of proportionate causality, you'd be holding to a position in which the like the cause produces an effect out of nothing, which
It
would
produces
violate this
a property.
property or
All right.
effect
So is
out of
water
nothing.
wet? Does water have the property of being wet or wetness?
Like, well, why?
It's an example of emergent phenomena.
Yeah, but
That's a counterexample to your position.
if it appears that way, that doesn't mean that's actually the case. It's just like an apparent
So water is not
observation.
wet.
The same way, like,
So water
for
is not wet
example,
on your view.
of like there can be a magician in which it appears that
Yeah,
if he
water.
made something disappear, but it doesn't actually disappear. It's just observational.
Okay. So water is not wet in reality on your view.
Well, I'm just saying, like, with these examples of emergent phenomena,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It can appear as if this is the case, but it doesn't mean it's actually the case, especially
Yeah,
if
water's not
you
wet.
could ground, for example, that rejecting the principle of proportionate causality violates the law of non-contradiction, which I would do because if you violate PSR, I can show how the rejection of PSR would
Sure.
violate NC.
I mean, you can't even produce like a valid argument, but we'll just.
Well, what's invalid?
I'm just curious,
about
like.
my argument?
Sure, you want to. Sure, let's do the argument. So the argument that emergent phenomena contradicts like contingent PSR. Okay, premise 1, let's go. Let's see how many invalid arguments you could make in a night, because your main argument is obviously invalid, but maybe we can make some more while we're up here. Sure, because it's using words like that aren't in the conclusion or using words in the conclusions that aren't in the premises. So it's like straightforwardly invalid. Like I could be charitable and I can sort of understand like what you're trying to say, but like it's obviously like formally invalid. But
okay, like
what's
take
your next one?
Let's take
P1.
for conclusion 1. What? Let's start with that. Where's the? How is this invalid right here? Premise 1 through
Sure.
4
What's
to
your-
conclusion 1.
All right. What's the inference rule for conclusion 1?
I was just using a modus ponens in which P is accumulation of premise 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And nobody on fire said time support for the channel, so y'all do have a little bit of time left still. But if y'all are enjoying the debate, please consider submitting a super chat. There's still about 30 minutes available on the extension time.
Yeah. So in the first conclusion, you're using a phrase called necessary being that doesn't appear in any of the premises. So it's like just straightforwardly invalid. Like you don't know how to make an argument.
Okay.
Which is fine. Like I was trying to be nice, but you were sort of being rude towards the end. So now I'm going to be rude a little bit back at you.
Okay. So
and what's the inference rule? You said it's a conjunction of premises 1 through 5.
Real quickly.
It's a modus tollens of the. What was your inference rule?
I said it was modus ponens.
Modus ponens.
Real quickly.
What's the modus ponens of?
Because with C1, how because I use the term necessary being does it mean that it doesn't follow?
That's absolutely what it means. You have to use the words of the conclusion in your premises, or it's going to be invalid.
In accordance to what? Like, why does that make it invalid?
Because, like, modus ponens is like P implies Q, P therefore Q. So you need Q somewhere in your premises, right? That's the form of the inference. But you don't know anything about anything. So I'm just like beating you over the head with like a 12-year-old who just went to Philosophy 101.
Why?
Right?
Why?
Because of the form of an inference rule. So for specifically the form of modus ponens is P implies Q, P therefore Q. So Q has to appear in one of your premises. And insofar as a necessary being isn't in any of your premises, then it's straightforwardly invalid.
Why is that the case? Why does that mean it's invalid though? Like, for example,
because
if premise 1,
valid rule of inference.
If premise 1 through 4, if you were to affirm those, then that would lead to you in affirming a necessary being. But it doesn't, and then the conclusion 1 affirms that there would then be a necessary being. Why would that make it completely invalid? If
Yeah, what's
premise
the
1 through 4
inference
don't
rule?
say the term
Because
necessary.
valid arguments have to use valid rules of inference. So what's the valid rule of
Yeah,
inference?
what
you're
makes it
using?
not logically follow? Like it. So for example, you know how
What's the
like
rule of
with the
inference?
let's
If it's
take
not a rule
for
of
example
inference, it's
with
invalid.
let's take the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Let's say
hmm
given that the Bible teaches the Trinity, right?
It
Even though the
absolutely
Bible
does not. But
doesn't
go ahead.
even though the Bible doesn't use the word Trinity, it still
Mhm.
would be if it does teach the concept of the Trinity, and that's just a term we're
Yeah.
using to describe that, that would be
Yeah.
logically valid.
So logical validity is just to use valid inferences. So you're going to have to supply the inference, and then whatever you supply as your rule of inference, the form of the argument is going to have to follow that form. So for modus ponens, it's P implies Q, P therefore Q. So Q has to appear in the conditional in premise 1. That's what validity means. But again, you're like some goofy goober apologist who
That's
hasn't taken
yeah. So that's
any
like your
classes
claim
in
for
logic
within
or philosophy.
within
I'm
your
just leaving it to the
understanding
audience.
and
I'm not
your
trying to convince you. You're just like embarrassing
well,
yourself.
And
within
Kurt has a question for Bug. Bug, do you hold the PSR as self-evident or axiomatic, or is it justified by the existence of a deity?
I would say like well it depends how you take axiomatic like you could say it PSR is axiomatic in the sense that its rejection would then violate the law of non-contradiction is dependent on the law of non-contradiction. But you could also say in some sense PSR is self-evident if you're saying that the law of non-contradiction is self-evident and anything violating it in that sense you could say PSR is self-evident. Howdy. So you've stepped like within
That's
your,
hilarious, by the way.
within
Go ahead.
your understanding of
hmm
logic, right?
Logic, right.
This is how this this is
You
the
have to use
case,
like
it
rules
would
of
be
inference.
invalid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
does
I
that
know
make
it's
it
kind of
like
sad, but you
like
sort of have to
is
use
this
rules of
objectively the
inference.
case then that this doesn't logically follow, or is it just in like your preferred understanding or formatting? that it doesn't logically
So anyone with like a cursory understanding of argumentation and validity is going to immediately discern that modus ponens is not being employed because it doesn't follow the format of it.
And this is
So maybe
like
when you're
is this
trying to, and also when
objectively
you're
the
saying
case,
like,
or is this just in like your world?
I'm saying anyone who, so what I mean by validity, maybe you mean something different. Maybe by validity, you mean tastes like strawberry ice cream. Again, because you probably like, you have like super proprietary language, right? That no one else uses in the field because like you just watch apologists and sort of parrot what they say without looking into any of it. But when I mean validity, I mean that the rules of inferences are valid inferences like modus ponens or modus tollens or like disjunctive syllogism or things like that that follow truth tables. Now, you might mean something different when you say valid, like maybe the argument makes you feel good or something, but that's not what I mean. That's not what logicians mean. That's not what anyone in the literature means. So maybe we're just speaking past each other, but insofar as that's what I mean by validity, your argument is
Yeah. So
straightforwardly invalid.
with this argument, the
Yeah.
modus ponens here, obviously modus ponens is if P true, therefore Q. The P would be the accumulation of premises 1 through 4. The Q is conclusion 1, right? If so, then you would just format it if P, that being premise 1, 2, 3, and 4 are true, therefore Q. P is true, therefore Q.
Yeah, I'm sure like if we took some time, I was
So
being
that
like I could
right
maybe
there, that would be valid.
charitably, I don't know. You'd have to write it out, but like presumably the argument could be made valid. Like I could be charitable about it, but since you're being rude, like obviously all of your arguments are invalid and you have no idea what you're talking about. It's like sort of
Okay.
sad.
What
I expected a
in
little bit
what
more,
like
but it's okay.
can you show me like why with a modus ponens Q would need to be in the premise for it to be valid? Why couldn't
Because
P
the
be the
form
premise
of
and then
modus
Q be the
ponens,
conclusion, and then it just be formatted where if P is true, therefore Q, P is true, therefore Q.
Right. So modus ponens is P implies Q, P therefore Q. That's an inference. Right. But you're not doing that in your argument. That's why it's invalid.
I am though. I'm just not rewriting.
Okay.
I'm not writing out. So let's
It's
say
just not. It's
with-
modus ponens, but
no,
just
okay.
not in the form of modus ponens. That's cool.
Hold up. Let me share my screen.
And real fast, there's a super chat question from Karen Dave. BugLovesAll, if you have a totally alternative construction of logic than the one we were sharing, could you please share it? The audience is lost. Great question. Thank you.
Wait, my construction of logic, it's the same as his. Like, look, can you give me permission to share my screen or like pull me up? Okay. Yeah. So all he's saying here is with the modus ponens, it's if P then Q. P is true, therefore Q. The P here would be these four premises. Premise 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the P. If this P is true, therefore Q. Q is conclusion 1. Right? So this is what it would just be formatted, right? If P then Q, P is true, therefore Q. That's logically valid. Really, his complaint is that I didn't put like conclusion 1 over here with like with an arrow for the Q, so then it would read out left to right. If P then Q, P is true, therefore Q. Like it's not, the argument's not actually logically invalid.
And Shadowslade says equating God with any part of reality means you need to prove how it's the same. Example, God is reality. Saying God is outside of space and time is the same as saying God does not exist. How is God real? Thank you for the
Equating God with any
Shadowslade.
part of reality means you need to prove how it's the same. What? God is reality. Saying God is outside of space and time is the same as saying God does not exist. Okay, well, the entire argument with saying God is outside of space and time is to say God does not exist is just like definitional. You're just defining that something outside of space and time doesn't exist. It's not like, it doesn't mean in reality he doesn't exist in the sense of like to be an act, right? Like it's purely definitional. You could do that with anything. I could say like to be part of reality means you exist in act and you're also not Howdy. So with that being said, Howdy doesn't actually exist in reality. Like technically that's true, but it's only definitionally valid. Like it doesn't really prove anything.
I guess I have like maybe a meta question. Like, do you think that you're performing well? Like, do you think that you know what you're talking about, or do you feel sort of embarrassed?
Like, do you have like an actual argument, or are we just?
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean it's just kind of a red herring.
I mean, I can keep beating you over the
what's
head on
wrong
this
with
if you'd like. Yeah, let's get
Yeah,
back to
well, I
beating
mean,
you over the
yeah,
head. So
with
modus
what I said, with
ponens,
modus
right,
ponens,
is P implies Q, P therefore Q, and so Q has to appear as a conditional in one of the premises. Insofar as your argument does not have that, your argument's invalid.
Why does it have to show up in one of the premises? Why can't it be like, for example, if we look here,
That's what it means to be valid.
if P
Yeah,
then
validity
Q,
just means like you
P
feel
is
good about
literally
it,
just
right?
premise 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So like,
What do you think? Actually, let me ask you, what
Thi-
do you think
hold on.
validity means?
I'm explaining something. This
Because
is
obviously
P.
it's not adherence
This
to
is
valid
P.
rules of inference.
This is Q,
So what
right?
does, yeah.
All we're saying, all you want me to do is take this and like, let's say there's like a bubble here. You want me to put this. If P, that being this, that's this
Mhm.
bubble. Therefore Q, that's this.
Point
bubble
of
Q,
moderation,
and
is
that's
your
what
name
this
on
is
there
gonna be.
Admiral Wamper?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the second bubble, right? If P then Q.
Uh-huh.
P is true, therefore Q. That's all. That's what you want me to do, right?
I'm saying if you want it to be valid, you're going to have to use valid rules of inferences.
That's
So,
literally
I'm
just
sure-
a format. That's not the actual thing being invalid.
Yeah, what do you
That's
think
just
validity?
what
do you think
you want me to like
validity is?
reorganize.
What do you think
it.
validity is? What do you think validity is?
Well, validity is determined by using valid inference rules. I agree, but I don't
Alright,
see
which
how
rule,
this
which rule
isn't
of
a
inference
valid
rule
modus
did you
ponens.
use? Oh, that's not a. First of all, okay. You're saying that this is the form of a modus ponens, or is it? Or is
I'm
it
saying
not?
that this is a valid modus ponens. This being P, this is Q. All this is stating is that if
Yeah.
if P is true, therefore Q.
No, it
P-
would be P implies Q, P therefore Q.
P
I said
is
this like
true,
5 times.
therefore Q, right? But P is just equivalent to this. Q is just this.
Yeah, you
This
could
is
say like if 1 through 4, then 5, 4, therefore 5 or something. But
Yeah, this is a valid modus ponens, right?
no. I mean, maybe you could make it into one, but it's not
How would
right
this not be a
now.
valid modus ponens?
Because the modus ponens is of the form P implies Q, P therefore Q.
Okay, so when we from your understanding, right? Something logical.
Yeah, it's just my understanding.
No, I'm asking from your understanding, something to be logically valid has to be an inference rule, and then it has to be formatted in this specific way. Like the way I'm doing it, this wouldn't.
Invalid,
consider
yeah.
valid.
That would be, yeah, that's absolutely invalid.
Okay. So right here, I fixed it. So P just
Mhm.
P. I'll even clarify. P is
Right.
just equivalent to premise 1 through 4. Q is just equivalent to conclusion 1, right? That's right
Yeah.
here. If P is
Mhm.
true, therefore Q, or then if P is true, then Q. P is true, therefore Q. Let's
Right.
do if P then Q. There's your valid modus ponens.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so wasn't that this was invalid? You just wanted it formatted this specific way. You just had a
I'm not sure what you think
had a
validity
problem with-
means.
you had a problem with
The
the
form
way
of
in
the
which-
argument, yeah.
it
the
still means the
structure.
exact
Well, I don't have a
same
problem with
thing.
it.
You just wanted me
I don't
to
have a
write
problem
this
with it.
out.
I don't have a problem with it. I think it's like cute and endearing, but yeah, for
You
an
think I'm
argument to
cute
be
and
valid,
endearing?
it has to be of a valid form. Kind of. You're a little spicy, but
Oh,
yeah, you're like a tiny little infant swinging about using words you don't understand. But
really?
yeah.
So does this mean like you're gonna add me back on Discord and can become best friends? Maybe more.
I don't have you added on. I don't think I have you added on Discord.
Don't worry, I'll add you after the conversation.
Okay. Are you going to stop listening to insane pop apologists on YouTube and like open up a
I
book
didn't
on
get this
logic?
from pop apologists. I don't think no one even like runs this. Like the only really mainstream.
No, I'm saying like where you're getting your understanding of like terminology from.
Yeah,
Or maybe you're inventing all of that too. That wouldn't surprise me either because it is pretty idiosyncratic. But I mean, that seems dubious because it is like somewhat similar to the language that other people use. So that would surprise me.
And Shadow Slays says validity. I cannot read. Validity means using valid validity to make it valid. Believers need validation, therefore Sky Daddy validates them. Thank you for the tongue twister, Shadow Slays.
Yeah. By the way, this is how you wanted it formatted. This formatting is literally right here.
Sure. Also, since we're running out of time, you think
You
God
got
is actus
18 minutes
purus
right now.
Oh, so you think God is actus purus?
I think he's correct, yeah.
Are you aware that's like heretical in Eastern Orthodoxy?
Not what. Okay, what like dogmatic teaching does the idea?
There's
of
also
correct
8 additional minutes
or
available from super chats, or maybe I miscounted that. I'll double check it. Something like that, though.
Because you have to affirm the essence energy distinction and that the energies of God are God. And that you participate in them through hesychasm and the divine energy and the
How does
theosis.
EED, like how does
8
pure
minutes
act
available still.
contradict EED?
Are the energies of God God?
I mean, okay, honestly, this is a completely different
All right.
Do you know what a formal actual is?
Do I know what? Can you speak up?
Do you know what a formal actual distinction is?
A formal, actual distinction? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what we affirm.
Although I would prefer to use the terms like rationally distinct if we're going to get into that.
Well, I mean,
But
that's the technical term for what we affirm. I can give you like a document on it after.
okay. Are you are you a catechumen, or did you get through the catechesis?
Via my catechesis.
Okay. So how much actually I don't want to be rude, but I do have a question because I did want to get into some like inter-Christian type stuff. So are you do you like are you aware of like the distinctions between like perichoresis and economia?
Yes.
Actually, let me ask you this
What,
first to
what,
sort
what
of
do you,
test
what,
your.
well, how is this relevant?
Oh, I think the doctrine of divine simplicity compromises Christianity because God can't enter into any real relations with creation, such that in actuality, Jesus Christ is not your Savior or your Lord, and also was not crucified, buried, and resurrected. So, in
That's not
fact,
even the topic
on your
of the
view,
debate, dude. Red herring.
right? Well, it's not really red herring, and it is sort of relevant
The
to the debate
topic is
because
on
it
my
disproves your
argument
own
for God's
God.
existence, and you're debating me on divine simplicity.
Well, you think God is simple, so obviously it's going to turn on whether or not divine simplicity is true. You want to go back to me beating you over the head on validity? I guess we can go back to that if you like.
I mean, you
But I was trying
affirmed
to like progress the
my
conversation a
you
little bit.
affirmed my uh my update, right? I mean,
Well, I
you
mean,
already
it
affirmed my
might be
update.
valid.
It wasn't even an update because it's written right here. I literally just repeat word over
Nobody
here.
Empire says, "Let there be blood." A little more. The $8 super chat to maximize the time.
I don't want Howdy to bleed.
chat.
That's not very nice. Howdy, I donate
I
my
got to
blood
bend
to
down
you.
though so you can see the screen. Oh,
No, it's
You
all
don't
good.
have any. You sort of torn yourself to pieces. I'm trying to like help you,
No,
and you're
no,
like
like
lashing out at me.
I called the blood bank. They are sending that little van over there. We got some blood.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I know that like. What's your favorite food, Howdy?
Lately, I've been eating chicken and rice and popcorn.
Really? What kind of popcorn do you like? You like butter popcorn?
No, I just get usually the plain, unless when I order and they card it to me, they might have substitutions, and then I just eat whatever the substitution is, unless it's like crazy.
Hmm. Have you ever had the like coconut oil popcorn? I like the.
No, that sounds disgusting.
It's not bad at all, actually. Maybe
Do you
I'll
think
like.
is Jesus your savior formally or in actuality?
It's. It's.
You can't even believe the gospel on your doctrine of divine simplicity, by the way.
Yeah, that's a completely different topic. Debate topic.
Is Jesus your savior in reality or not?
In reality and
All right, then
actuality.
he can possess relations. He can inhere in relations with creation. So you reject divine simplicity. Thank you.
How does it reject divine simplicity? What do you take divine simplicity?
So
I'll
divine
take
simplicity. Well,
debate.
part of the relevant part of divine simplicity is that God cannot possess any accidental properties or relations. So God can't enter into relations with anything. Not real relations, like maybe you could say formal relations, but then
You
you'd
know
have to
what?
say that Jesus is your savior only formally.
I know a guy that would love to debate you on this topic. I can set you up. Apophatic
Sure.
is bread and
Yeah,
butter.
apophatic theology. So what's
He
your
actually affirms
response
absolute
though?
divine simplicity.
Oh, so maybe what you mean by
let's
divine
keep it
simplicity
on
is something
topic
different.
or around the topic and not on other people. Other people are not involved in the debate right now. This is 1v1.
So is Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior formally
No,
or
you heard
actually?
him. We gotta stay on topic.
Well, around the topic, right? This is more loose in the second half, but we're not going to talk about other people, right?
Oh.
Because if you affirm divine simplicity, he can't be a relata of any real relation, including being your Lord or Savior, or being crucified even. But so yeah, on divine simplicity, you don't believe the gospel.
Interesting
So
take,
maybe that's
Howdy.
something we should think about.
Interesting take.
Do you have a response? What's your response?
Oh, like this wasn't a debate.
Okay.
I was just kind of letting you talk about it.
Is your God divinely, like, is what you're trying to prove something that can have real relations with anything or possess accidental properties? Is that the God you're trying to prove?
I was just proving
Is that what you mean by God?
By God, I mean fully actualized conscious first mover.
And when you
First
say
mover.
fully actualized, can a fully actualized being have real relations with anything?
I don't know, man.
Nice.
Like, I mean, that's like, that's not even part of the argument addressing that.
Well, it absolutely is, because you're saying,
okay, what was the conclusion?
because you're
of my
saying
argument?
causation.
What?
Because part of your argument includes causation, or does it not?
Part of it does include causation. Yeah.
Do you think God caused, in your argument, is part of the argument? Does it have to be the case that God created anything, or no?
Yeah. I mean,
Or caused, or let me, instead of saying created, let me say caused.
Yeah.
Is it part of the argument that God causes anything?
That a pure act being can't create?
It can't cause anything.
What do you mean by cause?
For me, when I say cause, I mean stand in a causal relation. That means to be causal, a causal relata. So like A causes B. That's a relation.
How do you define causal relation?
Let me pick a.
Because that was like pretty.
I'll give you. Hold on. Let me give you an analysis.
You're getting real close to that circular definition. Cause is.
I haven't given you a definition of cause. Yeah. I mean, it's a relation, and it's to cause is to stand in a causal relation. That's absolutely true.
Yep.
Anyone with any familiarity with causation is going to affirm that. That's not circular. That's just
word, like what's a causal relation?
Right. I'm about to give you one definition of it. I actually prefer the counterfactual. Right. So if we're doing a connectionist account, right, it would be that P immediately causes Q. If and only if had P not occurred, Q would not have occurred. Although maybe I want to go for an explanationist counterfactual, where it's like if P and Q are truths of the appropriate kind, and the truth that P causally explains the truth that Q, then the causal explanatory fact consists in the fact that Q would not have been true if P had not been true, i.e. not P implies necessarily not Q, using the Stalnaker-Lewis subjunctive conditional.
W. Gish Gallup. I appreciate
that's an analysis really of. I can slow it. Like, yeah, you're not going to be track it anyway. If P and Q are truths
a little slower
of an appropriate kind,
dude, you're going too fast.
The truth that P causally explains the truth that Q, then that causal explanatory fact consists in, here's the analysis, the fact that Q would not have been true if P had not been true. That is to say, not P necessarily implies not Q. That's a counterfactual conditional analysis of causation. You want some more?
So that's how
I can give you like the nomological deductive. Yeah.
How would a pure act not be able to cause?
Because a pure act being cannot have accidental properties. Because being in a real relation with anything is an accidental property.
Being in a real relation is an act.
Well, I guess it could be an essential property, but for the purposes of this, it would be an accidental property, unless you're like an emanationist or something. But
so you're
in this case,
you're affirming like that a God for like a necessary being to exist and be pure act, it would have to at least have like, you know how we have the Trinity, like at least two persons.
To be
two
pure
hypostases?
act, yeah, you just
Because
don't
they would need
understand.
to
You just
have
don't
like.
understand divine simplicity. Like if
Are
you
you
read
hold up?
Aquinas,
Are
right?
you
Go ahead.
affirming that for a necessary being to be a pure act, it would at least
For anything to be pure act, it can't have accidental properties because it can't
it would need at
change.
least one other hypostasis, so that then it wouldn't be an accidental property. A relation.
Yeah. It's like it's like a 4-year-old and you're like trying to show him the museum and he's like, hey, look at this painting, and he's just like burying his face in some
I mean,
ice
so
cream
with
or
that,
something
like,
over there.
could you go one further and even prove the Trinity? Like, are you for the Trinity now? Or are we only stuck at
No,
two?
if you're asking me what my analysis or my interpretation of the New Testament authors as well as the Old Testament authors, I
No, I meant like
absolutely reject the Trinity.
you basically argue that God would have to have two hypostases.
Yeah, so like if there's two ways. Either you're a necessitarian where it's like an emanationist thing where like P emanates Q of necessity, but that would like it would like be itself or something.
Honestly, I might add that then that it would have to at least have two.
Well, I mean, there's no. First of all, you can't have real distinction in a DDS analysis of the Trinity, right? What you have to say is that the relations are real and the relations are identical to the essence, but the persons themselves are correlatively only rationally distinct. Although
What
you
kind of
probably have to start reading books about the doctrine of the Trinity to understand like what I'm spitting at you because you're like totally lost and confused. I could recommend Paul Tome's Logic of the Trinity is a pretty good book if you want to start out. Or Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia, right, where he says all predication befalls only the creature. But you're obviously like unaware of like everything related to this topic, so it's sort of like boring. But yeah, one way of thinking about it is, well, you could sort of have because you don't want to be an emanationist because everyone affirms, well, I shouldn't say everyone, certainly EO affirms the creation ex nihilo, like he wasn't, and he was like a free act and a bunch of other stuff. But also they reject divine. So it's totally confusing to me, right? Why you're a Thomist, because Eastern Orthodox Trinitarians aren't Thomists. But so I don't even know what to say to like you're sort of like grabbing at things and sort of mashing them together. So I don't
Are you
even know what
calling
it
me a
is. It's like
Latinizer?
this. I'm saying that you are sort of you're like borrowing from both, and it's like
Get it
messy and
out.
confused. And they're like, no.
It's pretty offensive.
Are you in Rocor? Or are you in you're in America though, right? Like you're under Scopa, right?
Uh,
Based.
I
Did you go to Divine Liturgy this week?
I did.
Nice. Vespers?
Invest.
Oh,
We're locked in, bro.
in it. Are you going to become a schema monk? Oh, wow.
I can't do.
Yeah, so I would really like to know if you think Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior formally or in actuality. Yes or no? Formally. Oh my goodness. I think that's how much time do we have left on this debate? Because I'm gonna feel bad after this. I'm gonna have to take a shower. I just like feel
11
icky.
minutes.
When's the last time you
Oh
took a
my
shower?
goodness. It actually was yesterday. I probably need to take a shower anyway.
Oh, what about before that?
But I was gonna
a week.
Before yesterday. Usually like once a day. Sometimes I'll skip a day though because I don't do much, so I don't really have to. But usually once per day.
So like, are we just gonna sit here the rest of the 11 minutes?
We can argue some more. it's funny. So you were trying
Maybe
to
we
present
could, like,
another argument.
ooh, can we Netflix and chill, Howdy? We like put up a little Netflix
What's
and
your
cuddle up
argument
together.
for I remember you said you
Remember,
had an
Bug,
argument
going
that
off topic is a concession. Let's stay on topic.
Well, I
you
mean,
said
we
something
finished with
entailed
the topic pretty much. Like, there's
no,
Right,
we can go
but
more.
you can argue around it, right? Netflix and chill is like off to the moon, right?
well, like technically we could make that on topic though, because essentially, right, the Netflix and chill.
All right, stop wasting time. What's up, Howdy?
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that because he said he had another argument. I'm ready to write it down. Let's check this one out.
What
You said you
argument?
had an argument for something. You said like rejecting something rejects PSR or something entails like a contradiction. Actually, let me ask you this: what's your argument in support of the PSR?
Yeah.
Like, what justifies me? Like, why should I accept
I would affirm
this?
so the rejection of, if you reject PSR, then you'd be affirming the
And by
brute facts.
PSR, you mean this version of the PSR? Yeah. There would be brute facts.
Yeah. And then there would be a violation of the law of non-contradiction in respect to.
Oh yeah, I remember
grounding,
this. You said Taco, that brute facts entail a contradiction. Okay, brute facts entail a contradiction. So the conclusion would be that brute facts, right, implies some P and not P. That's the conclusion, right?
Mhm.
So what's the argument? How are we going to get this? What's P1?
In respect to well, I don't have a formal syllogism. The P and not P though would be in respect to rational grounding, given something that exists with brute facts.
So there's
something
rational
that
grounding
exists
and
does
not
not have
rational
a grounding,
grounding.
and something that does not exist does not have a grounding.
Something that exists does not have a grounding, and it is not the case that something that exists does not have a grounding. Is that the P and not P?
Some things that exist do not have a grounding, i.e. they exist as brute fact. Not P. Some things that that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Yeah, so a contradiction is, again, I'm sorry to press you on the form, right? But I'm a stickler for form. I'm sorry, but it's going to have to be like P and not P. So you could say something that exists does not have a ground, and it is not the case that something that exists does not have a ground.
Some things that exist do not have a grounding. Some things that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Yeah, that's just not a contradiction.
How so?
So a contradiction is a statement of the form P and not P.
Yeah, that's a P.
So you're going to have to say something here. So here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to say something. You're going to have to say something, and then you're going to have to say and then you're going to have to say not, and then you're going to have to say whatever you said again. So it's P and not.
Yeah, it's just the negation of the P. The negation of the
Right.
P, that being some things that exist do not have a grounding, is that some things that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Some things that exist do not have a grounding. Is that P?
Yes.
So the P and not P, would that be something that exists, or some things, I guess, that exist? Wait, is it singular or plural? Something or some things?
Some things.
Some things that exist do not have a grounding, and then the and then the not, and then some things that exist do not have a grounding. So what's funny is this is the form of a contradiction, but it's not a contradiction because you're quantifying over a section such that the first predicate could apply to some of the section, and the second predicate could apply to another section. So I could say some people have red hats and some people do not have red hats, right? But obviously that would just mean that could be consistent. It just means to say that some people have red hats and some people don't. Not that an individual person has a hat and not a hat. So unless I'm misunderstanding, that's what I take your alleged contradiction to mean. Or did you mean something else?
Yeah, I'm just saying in respect to rational grounding, there's no distinction between these two.
In respect to rational grounding, there is no distinction between things that have grounding and things that don't, or something?
Yeah, there's no rational
Is that-
distinction between the two. So like,
So
I think
there being no rational distinction between two things is not a contradiction.
it's in that respect, P being that things exist without a grounding, then not P being things that do not exist without a grounding. There is no distinction.
Well, that's just
between
not the form of a contradiction. You have to repeat exactly what you say for P twice. So it's PN, not P.
I repeated this P and just the negation of the P.
So the
Things that do
negation would be
exist and
not,
things that
and
do
then you
not
repeat
exist.
it again.
Did you miss that things exist and the things do not exist part? Or
So you're saying the contradiction is like some things exist and some things don't exist?
I'm saying the contradiction is in respect to rational grounding, no distinction between things that exist as brute facts and things that do not exist as brute facts.
So, in respect to rational grounding, I have no idea what that means, but
In the
there
sense
is
of,
no distinction between things that don't have grounding and things that have grounding, or things that exist and things that don't exist. Well, other than being like extremely conceptually confused and it not being the form of a whatever contradiction, it's also the case that you're like quantifying opaquely because you're saying some things. So it's like, well, some people could have blue hats and some people could not have blue hats. That's not a contradiction
I mean, ultimately,
either.
things exist without as a brute fact. Things do not exist as a brute fact. In its totality.
When you
It's
say
not even
things,
just
does that
one
mean
thing.
all things? When you say things, does that mean all
ultimately-
things or no things?
Ultimately, if you reject PSR and affirm that you're grounded in brute facts, then yes, ultimately, all things that exist
Oh,
would
so denying
ultimately be
PSR
ungrounded,
entails
and
all
things that
facts
do
are
not
brute
exist
and
are
all
also-
facts are. So denying PSR implies that all facts are brute and that all facts are explained.
That's not even what I said. I'm saying
Okay.
I said if you affirm brute facts and that things are
Mm-hmm.
ultimately ungrounded, then everything that exists is ultimately a brute fact, and everything that does not exist is ultimately a brute fact. There's no distinction between the two in respect to grounding in that sense.
Well, one, what's the argument for if I accept one brute fact, it implies that everything's a brute fact? And two, what's the argument that
Well,
even
I'm
if
just saying,
everything
if you
were a
aff-
brute fact, what's the contradiction?
I was giving another form of what I said,
Mhm.
in which you affirm that everything exists as a brute fact, like things ultimately exist as a brute fact.
Well, denying PSR doesn't entail you think everything's brute.
No,
It
I
means
was
that
giving
you
you the sense
you
of
think
you
that there's
reject
at least one
PSR
brute.
and you affirm that. That's why I said if you affirm that, then everything.
If I
that
affirm
everything
what?
exists, everything that exists ultimately is grounded as a brute fact.
But I don't
or
have
as a brute
to
fact.
affirm that.
Yes,
But I don't have to
that's
affirm
why
that
there's
to
the
deny
other form of
PSR.
form of the argument where it applies if there's at least just one brute fact. Because if you affirm there's no brute facts, and
So to deny PSR means there's at least one brute fact with respect to whatever the facts are that require sufficient explanation. Doesn't mean you think everything's brute.
yes,
But even if
that's
it
why there's
did,
two forms of the argument.
sure. What's the form that says like if I think that one thing's brute, that then everything's brute?
No,
What's that argument like?
I was saying that if you believe that ultimately everything that exists doesn't have a grounding, it just exists as a brute fact.
You don't have to say that to deny PSR.
That's why it's an alternate worldview. That's not the normal P and not P that I gave you earlier. I was just saying that
I'm
there's
saying, what's the
another
contradiction from
worldview in
denying
which people just
PSR?
believe everything came about as a brute fact or just
No, but
cause.
you said denying PSR entails a contradiction.
Yes, and I gave you the P and not P for affirming even just one brute fact. And I was giving you an alternate
Okay,
for the
so I have a
worldviews
brute
that affirm that
fact.
everything just exists just cause.
So I have a brute fact. What's the contradiction?
I gave the contradiction like 4 times, dude.
So the closest I got to a contradiction was
Is
that
there
some things
is
that
there a
exist.
distinction between, in terms of
And that
grounding?
is time. Go ahead and finish up your statements, and then
Yeah.
we'll go to the closing.
I just had one last question. In terms of grounding, between something that exists as a brute fact and something that does not exist as a brute fact, is there a distinction between the two, or do they both exist as?
Yeah, a brute fact is just a fact with no sufficient reason or an explanation, and then a non-brute fact is just a fact that is explained.
So there, in that sense, between that thing that exists and doesn't exist, if they both exist and don't exist as brute facts, in terms of grounding, there's no distinction between.
That sounds like nonsense. I don't even understand what you're saying. Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and move into the conclusions. I put up a vote for tonight's master debater. It's got Howdy and Bug on there, so make sure you put in your votes for that. We're also at 41 likes, only 9 more likes, and I'll be completely naked. Bug, I'm putting you at the top of the screen there. You ready?
For my,
Your conclusion?
yeah.
You've got 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Howdy, how long's your conclusion gonna be?
8.
I mean, I don't really
7
have a
minutes and
conclusion. I'm not gonna
45
lie.
seconds. You don't have a conclusion?
Not really.
Do you want to just say some stuff?
I just want to say that I like Howdy. He's a pretty cool guy. I appreciate y'all having me up here. And hopefully in the future we can get like an apophatic Howdy debate on divine simplicity, or a 2v2 going, which with apophatic and I and Taka, you can pick the topic whatever we debate. But yeah, appreciate y'all for having me.
Thank you for the great conclusion. And then, Howdy, let me know when you're ready and I'll start your timer.
Yeah, you can go ahead and start it.
You got 8 minutes.
So, yeah, it was a good bloodbath. Got a little spicy and fiery, but hopefully after the bloodbath, cooler heads can prevail
For
and we
the
can have a
great
cordial
conclusion.
sort of relationship where we're not, there's not a lot of animosity. Bugs, I think, well,
Rigged.
I guess I can give
Rigged
my
vote.
analysis of the debate because there's nothing else to do really. So he's just like obviously conceptually confused about almost every technical word used in his argument and in
I literally
explaining
defined
his
all the
argument
words.
and in the conversation. Other than that, it's like he says the PSR, but it's like which PSR, and then maybe it's like contingent being PSR, but we're sort of having to make a lot of assumptions and do a lot of work for him to even like understand what he's saying. Anyways, like the most charitably I can be is like he has given like no justification to affirm his version of the PSR. In fact, his arguments were so bad, I would just assume that people who believed the PSR would renounce that version, would just renounce it based upon how unpersuasive the argumentation was, just like totally lost and confused. I was going to respond to like possible arguments against rejecting PSR, but he didn't even provide any, so I'll skip ahead. So we don't even know like what the modal register of the contingency argument he's using is. We don't know what metaphysics of modality is being deployed. We don't know if he's talking about concrete possible worlds or abstract possible worlds, or even if he uses possible world semantics. We don't even have, right, his interdivinability modal operators. We don't even know what. I seriously don't understand what he's saying. I'm sort of having to do a lot of work to take whatever he's saying, right, this jumbled mess of vomit on the board, and I'm sort of having to take that and try to help him construct something out of it. And me trying to help this poor guy, he's just like lashing out of me in fits of anger, and it's a little irritating. But anyways,
I was lashing
so
out in
again,
anger.
one thing that's interesting is he admitted that the validity of the cosmological argument is parasitic on the ontological argument because he thinks God has a sufficient explanation for his existence that's internal to his essence or nature. Also, he, I think he agreed with me that you can't really construct this totality of all contingent facts because it would
What?
self be a contingent fact and it would be an element of itself.
We literally
Thankfully, we
already
have like
went over
axioms
that.
of regularity and foundation that sort of prevent this kind of nonsense. It's also probably a fallacy of composition, anyways, even if it was like some finite or non set containing itself sort of construction. But he also gave no justification that there can't be infinite chains
I literally
other
gave a
than the chain itself
justification.
requires an explanation. But obviously, the chain of explanation is explained by each of its members. Obviously, his Aristotelian metaphysics, which he doesn't even understand, so he had to walk him through like what that is a little bit at least, is
Okay.
obviously like totally outdated. It's circular, inadequately justified, unparsimonious, and it assumes ontological pluralism, which no metaphysician accepts, except for like 2% of them. That is to say, there's existent things that exist between existence and non-existent, and it assumes the felicity of eternalism, which I think a plurality of metaphysicians assume eternalism. But all of these, counting against his arguments aside, right? Um, he still has to rely on the principle of proportionate causality, which is just like straightforwardly refuted by
When did I
phenomena,
affirm
emergent phenomena. This guy can't even say that water is wet and that atoms are not wet. We can't even figure that out on his paradigmatic worldview, if he wants to use that language.
I have a response to that. I just
Also,
didn't
we didn't
want
even
to
get to this, but
do
even
it
if
because I
like
don't know if it's a trap. And there's no
also
need
his
to
argument's obviously
talk about
invalid.
it.
I tried to help him with it a little bit while he's lashing out at me, but let's just assume like,
Lashing
okay, I
out.
can
I'm abusive.
fix up whatever this nonsense is, right? Even if the argument were to be valid, non-theists could still make the move. This is like Taco's move, that something that exists necessarily that causes something contingent could just be like the singularity or any event that has like a probability of unity, depending on how you cash out like your modal scope and your modal metaphysics. But we don't even know what that is under his argument. But anyways, like all contemporary proponents of cosmological arguments require additional arguments to show the entities whose existence established possesses divine attributes. But he just early on in the debate admitted that the cosmological arguments are parasitic on the ontological arguments, but the ontological argument is unsound. Unfortunately, I didn't get in time to get into that, but obviously, if you think the ontological is unsound, then you have to reject anything that this guy's saying, if you can understand what he's saying. So I guess I can spend some time. Also, like, there's so many things like you could push back on and reject. You could be a causal anti-realist, and there's arguments against anti-realism. John McTaggart Ellis has a pretty reasonable argument. You could be a causal anti-realist, right? Bertrand Russell or David Hume could reject all of this as well. They could say causation is a scientifically obsolete concept. Cause and effect or other causal relata don't appear in any fundamental laws of nature, nor do any verbs that would express causal relations. And his argument seemingly would require necessary connections between separate existences. But if causation is a relation between separate existences, then causation can't be a relation of necessitation by conceivability. This is David Hume's famous argument. And again, the problems of the Aristotelian metaphysics is that the goal of the analysis of change is to explain becoming and change language, but unfortunately, he has to define his terms that explain change language in terms of change language, like potentials becoming actuals or transitions. I gave him like readily available plausible alternatives like the ADAT theory of change or non-Aristotelian causations like nomological, deductive, counterfactual, conditional, probability raising even. And also there's non-causal actualization objections within the Aristotelian metaphysics that non-causal explanations on the table for the actualizations of potential can be non-causal, like grounding or functional realization or structural or essentialist. Obviously a lot of non sequiturs, still the gap objection.
Dude, how long is this?
I guess I can give the eternalist objection. So his argument assumes the felicity of this is that there is temporal change, changes the actualization of a potential, and there's temporal change, then sometimes are potential, but all
Okay.
times are actual. This is eternalism. So change is not the actualization of a potential. Obviously, eternalism has.
Okay. We're turning him off. So for the debate review, yeah, I was waiting for him to finish, but like this, I feel like this is taking forever. So firstly, the chain is explained by the infinite regress of contingent causes. No, it isn't, because he already affirmed that a contingent thing doesn't explain its own existence, and it requires something else external to itself to explain its own existence. So contingent causes being an infinite regress wouldn't explain their own existence because they don't explain their own existence. So he already affirmed that understanding contingent. So what he said here doesn't work. Ontological pluralism, I literally never affirmed that. I did viciously lash out and beat him. That was my bad. I shouldn't have done such a decrepit, evil, abusive act. And he also talked about the singularity being the necessary being. Why didn't he do that during the debate? Like, I think he knows that if he ran the singularity arg at being the necessary being, it wouldn't work because he knows the necessary being would have to be have no potentiality. Like, this is a very basic thing to run or to like debunk. So, I mean, I don't know why he was bringing up stuff that he never even talked about in the debate. Like, oh, I could have run this. Like, why didn't you? Yeah, like, by the way, he did, like, yeah, I did my job. I did what I was supposed to do. I don't think he understands what, like, these terms are that are used to, like, as names of a collection of a set, like animal kingdom, contingent reality. Like, I explained that to him like 4 different times. Apophatic even explained it to him. Look. A collection is not a substance. We're trying to explain the existence of contingent things, not just a set, which is conceptual. Yeah, PSR is referring to grounding for things. It's not that difficult. But yeah. Tisk tisk, boys. Tisk tisk. He's still yapping. Okay, I'm leaving. I've been waiting long enough. Oh. By the way, I was wanting to like I was trying to figure out like I wanted to do a face cam, but instead of me it was like a YN. But I only thought of that idea like 4 minutes before the debate, and I wanted like a box where it literally said face cam too, but I couldn't find one. So like the stream quality could have been way better. I'm not gonna lie. But y'all have to settle with the magnificent thumbnail I've crafted up. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I had. That's all I have for y'all. I thank y'all for tuning in. I'm pretty proud of how I did. I was avoiding the red herrings. The debate wasn't on like the divine simplicity stuff. He was trying to force it that way. Like, I'm not going to address that. It's also not my cup of tea. Obviously, I'm not well studied up on it, but even given that, like, I could honestly just play the game of asking him to justify like why these specific things for all of his claims, because I don't think he can. It better have been Is Toy. That thumbnail is magnificent. I'm gonna make this like an actual video, and I'm gonna probably cut out this ending thing, because like I don't know. Like, do I include the whole debate and just have the watch time just like tank, or I don't know. I'll figure that out. Oh, to this stream I tried out the low latency instead of normal latency. Next stream, if I remember, I'll do ultra low latency for the people. But yeah. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the support, the likes. Make sure you're going to church. Make sure you're doing your prayers.